Welcome to Pratidwani, where we try to humanize science. I am your host, GV Pawan Kumar. It is my delight, pleasure, and honor to welcome today's guest on this episode, the philosopher Sundar Sarukkai. Sundar, interestingly, actually has very fascinating background. He was a physicist who turned into a philosopher of science, including social sciences. He has held various different academic positions at NIAS, at Manipal, Indian Institute of Science, and in recent times, he has kind of established one of the very fascinating initiatives in the context of philosophy called as Barefoot Philosophers, which hopefully we'll also get to know more about it. Sundar also is a prolific author and has written many books, which we'll also kind of converse during the this particular discussion. Of which philosophy for children, uh, thinking, reading, writing, has really been one of the fascinating books which I have come across and read, including my daughter, who has also read that particular book, and we feel that it is one of the fantastic books written in recent times. I actually got exposed to Sundar when I was an undergraduate. This was more than 20, 23 years ago when I attended a summer program at NIAS, and Sundar gave us a course on philosophy of science. I was completely blown away. I still think it is one of the best courses I've ever taken in my career, not just only as a student but also as now an academic who is now into full time research and teaching. So, with this introduction, I welcome Sundar Sarukkai.
Thank you, Pawan. It's such a great pleasure to get back in touch with you and to see you again after the summer school and to see you doing so well in your field. Thank you so much for having me in the
Yeah,
podcast.
thank you, Sundar. It's our pleasure to have you here. So, Sundar, we're going to actually get started with the origins. Please tell us where were you born and how did you get interested in everything intellectual right from the beginning?
Okay. So that's a long time back, but I was born in Chennai. My parents were there, and then we shifted to Bangalore. My father was also a scientist, and so it so happened that he came to NAL and then he was a professor in the IISc. And so we moved to Bangalore, and I think, in my fifth standard. I joined fifth standard here. So all my schooling, which was at St. Joseph's Indian High School, it's a great school to study, mainly because we had great sports person in that school at that time. And we had
Yes, yes.
huge playgrounds, which today, as you know, coming from Bangalore, they've all been taken away by other people. But it was really a great learning experience, going to that school. And of course, I can't resist adding that the tuition there was still 3 rupees a month. We had a very diverse class, and it was really wonderful. So I think, yeah, that was part of my regular schooling. But I think my interest in science, definitely it's influenced by my dad. His name is S.K. Rangarajan. He actually had a very odd trajectory himself, and I think that in a sense, I just say a line about it because that influenced a lot of what I did.
Okay.
Makes sense of what I did. He was a mathematician. He studied mathematics. Basically, had done a BA in mathematics, I think BA honors, and came from a very poor family. And so they had to get jobs. He worked as a film critic. He used to write film reviews. Then he worked in the post office, and then he got a job in a college in Karaikuri teaching mathematics. And what happened is that he was, I think, a very prolific mathematician, really a very different mind. And in a sense, he was sort of discovered by the director of Secretary in Karaikuri, who had come across a paper in mathematics he had written. And there's a long story, and people have recounted it in various places in the web. So my dad's
What is his
entry
name?
into
What
science,
is his name, Sundar? What is
S.K. Rangarajan,
S.K. Rangarajan? Yes.
Rangarajan, yeah, he was at IPC at ISC. And very oddly, if I remember right, when he was invited to join IISc, he was uh, the only person who was a professor without a PhD or even master's. And it was Satish Dhawan who had recognized it and we had invited him and so on. So It was that kind of idea of science which was so much present in my growing up. So, which means, um, so after my dad was when I was in school, he was at ISC, so he used to have a lot of students come over. So and my dad used to have students from physics and maths as much as chemistry would be, talking to him because he's basically a mathematician. And what happened is that they would all come home and they'd all be sitting around and they'd be discussing all this kind of stuff. And I was, I think actually also because of that, some of his students one of his student, Anil Kumar, used to have all these very interesting books on philosophy, literature. And we were a big family. My dad had five children, so I have three brothers and a sister. So there were five of us, and so we were like very indulged by all these students who came, because they thought, we were all just hanging around and they should all bring sweets and books for us and so on. And so there are a lot of books. So I basically grew up reading fiction. And Anil used to have all these books in philosophy too, Nietzsche and stuff. And then, you used to leave all that. And my dad was also very interested in philosophy. But, he was a hardcore scientist at the time. So I just grew up like that in that sense. So to me, I was very interested in science. I think to me, I knew right from school I wanted to do science. And when I discovered quantum physics,
Mm-hmm.
it was I thought this is the greatest thing, and it's really that's the only thing I wanted to do. Part of it, I think, was because of a more literary sensibility. I mean, in retrospect, when I think about it, it's like, everything looks so neat and nice and mysterious. And anyway, so I decided whatever happens, I was going to do physics. I want to do physics. And yeah, so that's largely the learning which I did. And I was not really very interested in school and doing all this stuff. But more than that, it was more about just learning something. I must say that in my Indian high school, the principal was so good, the wonderful principal, Sunil Joseph, and he was, he would allow access to the labs. He would ask me to come and teach in other classes because I was, interested in setting up science labs and stuff. So this usual kind of semi nerdish thing about science was very much part of my growing up. Not in an academic sense, but just as a kind of learning. So, and that's really, that was my progress in that school time. And then
Nice.
then I joined Joseph's College to do a BSc in physics because, as I said, it's pretty clear I wanted to do it. And that started off my trajectory in physics.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So then, growing up in such an environment where you have academic kind of background at your home, may have also influenced you to look at what people are doing, in what way they are actually trying to understand their world. So, how did it influence? How was it? How was your schooling time? Because I know Saint Joseph actually is a very active school. A lot of sports,
Mm.
as you mentioned. It is
Mm.
also something which is very well known for extracurriculars and other things. Could you please
Yeah,
paint us a picture? Yeah.
if I'm trying to recollect, the point I was not. There's not too much of extracurricular for me. Um, to me, the my basic extracurricular was playing cricket.
Mm.
I was just, every day would just come home and play. I think I spent more time playing, either
Hmm.
inside our house or even my dad was crazy about playing. So, and that's one of the good things of having a large family. You can always play within houses and
Yeah.
outside. So I was most of the time I was playing. Actually, if you ask me what I did more than studying, that's what I did. And also, I had a group of friends I grew up in that. Like typically how we grew up in Bangalore. For
Yeah. Yeah.
example, one of my friends right opposite my house was also a big influence. He was a very radical chap. I mean, he was dropped out of school and dropped out of college and all that stuff, and he wanted to be a filmmaker. And
Wow.
he, so a lot of my literature interests were with him, and we would have a lot of discussions on that. I remember that time my Kannada reading was not very good, because our school we just had Kannada as third
Mm.
language, and he would bring Kannada magazines. So he used to read all the famous Kannada writers' short stories and people who would publish you. So things like that. So I think that was also great. So I would say my real influence is not really in that sense academic. It was more
Hmm.
about as I said, there's a big family, so always things happening in the house and relatives and playing and lot of music and this literature interest with my friend, which is in film. So I actually think a lot of that helped me, influence my later shift into, the kind of understanding of science I wanted to do and so on. And yeah, I also think that when I went on, for example, to do again, I joined St. Joseph's College
Hmm.
to do BSc Physics, and they were like really surprised that I wanted to join BSc itself. That's
Hmm.
for them. It's like, why do you want to come and study science, especially if you score very well in your PU and all that. So I remember, just as a vague anecdote which often amuses me, because I'd always studied in Joseph's, I had applied only to Joseph's for my BSc,
Okay.
and
Okay.
because I didn't even think of other colleges in Bangalore. And we're all like very loyal college people, in Bangalore. Christ was the enemy of Joseph's and all that.
I
And
went to MES. I went to
oh,
MES.
really?
National.
Okay, okay. Yeah, yeah. I can you okay. Well, you must have been a very good student, I must say. We know what MES. Yeah, that's a wonderful college. So what happened is that so I'd applied only to this, and then in the PU exams are not very challenging, so I'd scored very high or whatever it is. And then I went to Joseph's for my BSc when they announced the results, and I found my name was not on the list.
Wow.
And
Okay. Yeah.
they taken about 80 people or something. It's a huge class, okay, and I was not selected. So I got really worried because first of all, I hadn't applied to any other college, and I was so sure these guys are not going to reject me. So I went to the Princey and I asked him, "What is this? You have not selected me." And he said, "No, we know you won't take it up because you're waiting for engineering. So
Hmm.
we know that you don't want to take. So we don't want to waste our seat."
Hmm.
I said, "No, I want to do physics," and he didn't believe in me, and he said, "Give me a letter." So I wrote a signed letter saying I'm
Wow.
really interested in doing BSc because he was like, "Who wants to do science?" This is in '83, right, or '80? Yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, it was 80. And then who wants to do science? And I was the only guy in the whole class who had to say that I'm interested in doing physics, so I'm doing BSc. You know, and
Fascinating.
but we had some really good teachers, and
Yeah.
I really think a lot of our great learning in science is really at the foundational level is there, right? I mean, even in MES and our, some of these
Yeah.
colleges have such dedicated teachers.
Yeah. Very
We,
true. Very
we
true.
had very very good ones in physics and maths and all that. And of course, and I think the syllabus that time was also very vast. I mean, we were doing so much here because we had to
So
do
many.
PCM major, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So each of them was so much stuff, but I really enjoyed it. I think Joseph's was great fun in various ways, right? Because a lot more things which we do there rather than. I
Yeah.
don't think anybody in my class was really thinking of science as a career or
Hmm.
you know doing PhD or whatever in that sense, right? So I think that may have been due to my academic influence because I thought I knew this is what we all do, and if you want to, if you're really interested in physics and you want to do it, you have to do this. But it was really enjoyable for me in a variety of ways. Joseph's had a telescope. I
Hmm.
think the only
Yes.
college which had a
You're right.
lovely telescope on
Uh,
top.
Top. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they would actually allow me to go use it. And so I started a science club and tried to get people interested in that. I mean, now everything is gone, of course. They've all done various other things. And because the only courses which are running are law and
Hmm. Yeah.
management and so on, right? So there was this and I think our principal that time was Father Nelapati, who was a chemist, who was also
Hmm.
very interested in chemistry. I mean, he came from a chemistry background, research background. So I thought it was a very good college to be. It was a pity that the whole of the BSc section, there are very few, whether in maths or physics or chemistry, who are really interested in pursuing science as a career at that time. But yeah, it was great fun in a lot of ways. And then, as usual, all our trajectories are so linear in that sense, right?
Hmm.
So then I went off
Hmm.
to IIT to do IIT Madras to do physics, and I think there
MSc. MSc.
yeah, MSc, yeah,
Hmm. Hmm.
and it was quite a very different entry into the world of physics
Hmm.
there.
Hmm.
Not always very pleasant. I don't think I enjoyed it much there.
Okay.
You know, I the kind of excitement and the kind of understanding and teaching these foundations of physics and science in the BSc program, I thought was far better. And there were one or two very good teachers, and I'm sure that others were somewhat committed, but it didn't at all leave me with a good sense of what um, doing physics really was at that time. And IIT was, of course, once you go to your hostel, as you know, it's a very different world. It opens up very different world, doing various other things, including a lot of playing. But that has been my most constant thing, I think. And then after my MSc there, I then went to Purdue to do a PhD, and I still was managed. I stuck with my original plan of physics, so when I went there, it was I was very quite clear what I wanted to do. I thought so. I ended up doing particle physics, basically theoretical, which I like quantum field theory and all that stuff, and I like the courses. They're quite intense, and yet obviously there's a lot more professional approach to teaching physics, especially after my IIT Madras, and yeah, again it was, I think, a great learning for me. But as usual, I was also attracted to other things. I mean, for me, the world of life, the world around me, the life world, if you want to call it, had too many things from which I could learn. And it was just the idea that theoretical physics was going to sustain my interest in making sense of the world. I realized that was not really my major interest. As I said, at one level, I was very fascinated by these questions, particularly of mathematics and
Mm.
physics. But I also realized doing technical physics was something very different. It needed very different kind of belief systems, and for me at that time, it was more about trying to understand the basis of physics. And I didn't know that's what you might do in philosophy. Like, good science students, I didn't know anything about social science and humanities, or that there were, although I'd been reading Nietzsche and stuff, which I think every teenager reads anyway. I'm not reading it as a philosopher, but more like a rebel. But yeah, I just knew that there were these questions, just not, I was not very comfortable with the fact that I was doing something in physics and I didn't know why. Didn't know why in the sense, not why I was doing something, but why should this mathematics work? Why should, what is meant by calculus? Why should these kind of structures actually give you such an insight into the physical world? Okay. I
So
Yeah.
one of the questions I have is like, is there a particular inflection point,
Hmm.
even while you are studying BSc, as you mentioned, many a times when you get exposed to sciences at the bachelor level,
Yeah.
uh, the excitement actually is the maximum. I
Hmm.
personally also I felt that once you get exposed to physics in a slightly more popular level,
Yeah.
especially at the bachelor's level,
Yeah.
it's kind of fascinating because you are getting exposed to relativity, quantum
Hmm.
mechanics,
Hmm.
and some kind of thought processes which is kind of putting you in pedestal with something little bit more abstract.
Yeah.
You are actually looking at the world which is supposed to actually be classical on a day to day basis, but suddenly you realize that there is something more beyond that. That
Hmm.
is one particular point of kind of conversion in your thinking. But
Yeah.
there is also a higher order kind of realization at some point of time, even when you study any subject in depth, is
Yeah.
that there is an attached philosophy related to that particular subject.
Hmm. Hmm.
As you mentioned, there is a thought process, there is a way
Yeah.
people
Yeah.
think about it. Was there anything like that you got because
Um,
you
hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
because you specialized in theoretical physics, if I
Yeah.
understand correctly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think, as I said, my exposure to philosophy and primarily also literature including
Hmm.
the Arthur and stuff, came from that kind of a milieu where I was just reading these books.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
as I said, Nietzsche was more like a rebel thing rather than a very deep philosophy thing. But I was that question was there. But when I was attracted to physics, but I must say, yeah. For example, I remember the two of the great books which really caught my attention so deeply was one Dirac's book on quantum
Hmm.
mechanics, which was a very odd formulation. I don't think people teach that nowadays.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
bra and ket
Right.
notation.
Yeah.
It's such a, I mean, and it is so English based in the sense compared to how you'd write with so much mathematics
Absolutely.
today. But I thought it was working at some conceptual. So already, I
Hmm.
think in retrospect, thinking about it, I could see why I was attracted to it. But the other great book, which is really mathematical and abstract, which I really liked, was Landau and Lifshitz. They had this series of these things, including on classical mechanics.
Hmm.
I mean, it's such a pleasure for me just to even open that book today, just to look at that succinct ideas. And that was even about classical physics. So to me, the while I was, something in the mathematics of quantum physics attracted me when I first saw it, like Schrodinger's equation and so on. But then when I saw this Landau Lifshitz text, it was like, I said, wow, this is such a great way of doing science. But as you said correctly, the real nitty gritty comes much later. They have done the package deal, right? But to do those nitty gritty stuff needs a kind of a commitment. And I think, as part of my PhD, first of all, I was very distracted in the sense, there are too many things which attracted me. I was part of a member of, now I was looking at all the US protest movements going on. At that time, when I was a student at Purdue, we had the same disinvestment from South Africa, the apartheid regime. So there was a
Nice.
lot of protests on the campus forcing universities to get out of South Africa. So, along with a group of some undergrads there, I started a group called SCAR, against apartheid and racism, Students Coalition Against
Nice.
it. And we did this, we did all the same thing. And I'm looking at all the news now and I'm saying, God, we were much
Deja
better. They
vu.
didn't call any cops. Yeah,
Yeah.
but they were much nicer. I think US was
Yeah.
much better those days, perhaps. And, so I was involved in that. But even before that, so I knew I was going to do this. And for me, one of the greatest pleasures of physics is teaching physics.
Hmm.
I mean,
Hmm.
even today, if I get any kid who is willing to listen to me, I'll start teaching physics for them. And so my cousins' kids and all, they wouldn't come home only. They'll be like scared, and say suddenly I start teaching them something. But, I think even today, teaching physics and maths, or now philosophy, of course, but also physics and maths, such a pleasurable thing for me. That was really so I was a TA, so I really enjoyed doing that. But then, I was also very much concerned about these questions. I didn't know how to articulate them. I didn't know it was like philosophy in that sense. Then one day I was talking to somebody, and this guy said, "Oh, there's a philosophy professor here, and maybe you can go ask him if you're so interested. Ask him if you can take their classes." And that's really where my trajectory began, because it was just after 1 or 1.5, 2 years, maybe 3 semesters at Purdue in physics. I then went to meet this guy, and his name was Michael Weinstein. He was a political philosopher, quite a radical chap. I mean, very, very unique individual. And again, a great teacher. And I went to him and I said, I'm studying physics, but I'm really interested to learn what philosophy is about. And I said, I'll do it like I do regular courses. So the first time I did it, I said, I don't know whether they'll allow me to take the courses, but I'll just come for one of your class. He said, yeah, come. And he was teaching political thought, Mosca and others. I still remember that. And I remember when I went there, I was sitting with all these students, and I was like, I didn't understand what they were doing. In the sense, it was so much textual. I mean, I said everything to him what I hear scientists tell me every day now, which is,
Hmm.
or at NIAS very often, which is, why are you guys using language so much? Why don't you say it in a very succinct manner? What is your point? The whole problem, the tension between science and language, which really has become so much more even today. For me, when I first decided, I said, why are they reading all these big books and writing all this stuff? And it was very good. And I think I also went in with a very open mind. I said I wanted to learn.
Hmm.
I didn't have any other say. I didn't want to judge them for their discipline. I just wanted to learn something. And it was not, it was like one of these music teachers in India, who say, I'm going to teach whatever it is, I'm not going to teach what you want, because that is not the philosophy I wanted to learn. It was some political thought, Machiavelli, Mosca,
Mm.
and others. And I just sat, I read, I learned, I wrote whatever they were doing, and it didn't capture my attention much. I mean, that kind of philosophy did not interest me. But Michael Weinstein attracted me as a teacher. And, every semester he was teaching something different. And he said, no, next semester he'll be doing something else. So for next 5 years, I took all his courses. Then I took
You
a
became
course.
you shifted
I
to
No, no,
philosophy.
no. I was doing physics. Physics
Ah,
was paying me,
okay.
So I was a TA, which is, and I had a very interesting guy. Not guy, I mean the TA prof who was a Hungarian. Was okay, quite crazy character, and he was in experimental physics. He was
Okay.
involved in the Fermi lab and all that,
Mm.
and really crazy guy. But then he told me, he said, you do whatever you want in your teaching. He never came, he never asked what I did. So it's basically I was teaching the whole course and I could do what I wanted. And he never used to come at all. That is a really crazy character, a very interesting character. So I would do that. So that takes care of my thing. And doing research, theoreticals, whatever it is,
Mm.
very well. So I'm just sitting somewhere doing it. I don't have to meet the prof and my guide. I must say he was very open and very supportive in a very different sense, in the sense he didn't bug me to
Yeah.
do the kind of, get me every week something or the other. He was also quite a chill out. He was a Taiwanese American,
Mm.
and he, and I had to go to him after the first semester. I had to go to him to get my because I wanted to know how to accredit the courses, and they said I was allowed to do that, but he had to sign off on it. And the first time I went to him and I told him I'm taking these courses, he said, "What are those courses?" I said, "It's philosophy I want to do." He said, "Why are you doing philosophy?" I said, "No, I just wanted to learn that, and I'm anyway doing my work now." He was very
Mm.
gracious. He signed it. So every semester I
Nice.
would go to him to get the card signed for doing, if I wanted to credit these courses. I was doing the crediting just to push myself to be, more sincere in what I was doing, in the sense, because I know with all the pressure of this, I might just, take the easy way out and say I
Mm.
don't do the assignments and so on. And so and then it was really a very big jump in my learning, because there it was a completely different way of sitting through these research seminars.
Yeah.
With Michael, we had one with PhD students, and just a research seminar, and we would meet from 7 to 11 in the night. The
Yeah.
whole world of academic learning changed with humanities for me, and it also spoke back very strongly to my latent interest in writing. I mean, that's always been
Mm.
part of my interest
Mm.
even as a child. And for me, therefore, doing philosophical writing was far more natural than, although I had great love of mathematics and liked to do mathematics, it was still, for me, writing in philosophy was never seen as a task.
Ah.
It was never
Mm.
difficult. It was not a task in that sense. It's actually a flow. And so I really enjoyed doing that, and some other courses with another person who was a very famous philosopher, Heidegger's student, and he was also, I did a course with him too. And it was all, very, as I said, the world of the humanities and sciences was so different, even in this teaching. We're sitting in those classroom reading the kind of books, the assignments I would write, and so on. And so it was pretty clear to me that, that gave me much more joy, you know
Wonderful.
um, um,
At this point, I would also want to kind of ask, uh, this current which is there inside. Uh,
yeah,
Generally, this is actually very common, including personally.
yeah,
I have to mention that although the education is through sciences, there is
mm,
already always a hidden kind of urge to study humanities.
yeah,
Because there is something deeply uh, kind of connective to the world in which you live. Not
yeah,
that the physical world is detached, because when you study physics, of course, you still actually can see something which is happening. But the interaction which you have as human beings, in fact, part of the reason why I'm doing this podcast is exactly
Mhm.
motivated by such
That's
things.
really amazing. I
Yeah,
mean, looking
yeah,
at some of your other stuff,
yeah,
and also the title of Science and Humanism,
yeah,
so
yeah,
much needed. Yeah,
yeah. So this urge somehow is uh, is subdued in people. In
Mhm.
fact, you can now see. I think that has been changing of late, especially among people who study sciences. They know that there's a lack of uh, education in humanities. I'm not talking about formal
Mhm.
education,
Yeah, yeah,
some kind of an exposure to humanities based kind of viewpoint,
yeah,
which actually is very important to become a good scientist or to become even a good engineer.
yeah.
uh, in that sense, you actually had an opportunity when you're doing your phd to really formally learn it. uh,
Exactly. Yeah.
but is there a way that somebody who's wanting to venture into such kind of things at any
Mhm.
age, how
Yeah.
how does one have to go about kind of thinking on those lines? You have any specific
Yeah.
viewpoint?
So this is a question which has come in different ways whenever we talk about many of these questions about what kind of education we should be looking at. I think to me the fact was that, I mean, just like I went into courses in philosophy, I also went to the maths department and took courses there because I was very interested
Hmm.
in topology and stuff. And there's different kinds of learnings, but there was something, as I said, more intuitive or natural for me to gravitate more towards philosophy. And the philosophy we did there had nothing to do with philosophy of science because what
Hmm.
Michael and they came largely from the continental tradition.
Yeah, yeah.
And the continental tradition was like very different, very language verbose, and they had very different ways of approaching these kinds of questions, unlike what is the analytical or the philosophy of science, the dominant philosophy of science tradition. And actually, I was not interested in doing philosophy of science at all because I didn't want. I'm so anyway doing physics, which was a lot more fun than doing philosophy of science. Because for me, I felt like a lot of the early philosophy of science or this analytical philosophy of science was like doing weak science. And if I could do that, I might as well do science, which is a lot more fun, more
Yeah.
creative actually. I
Hmm.
For me, that's part of my struggle with Indian science community is that when they try and um, not understand the complexity of science, including the human dimensions,
Hmm.
they reduce it to some very naive idea of logic. They really miss out on the creativity, the kind of like things which I'm sure you know very well. So I'm saying that idea. So for me to do philosophy of science of that kind, I was not even interested, and neither were these philosophers doing it. So I didn't learn that at all from them. So it became a lot more of this continental French and German philosophers and stuff. And that was a great learning because it is a completely different framework, and I had to do this kind of reading and writing. Now, does one need to go through that? Is a very important question, right? And
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
we pick it up from various places and so
Hmm.
on? I do. I mean, for me, I think I would not have maybe shift. Maybe I would have. I don't know. At least my professional works on philosophy would not have been possible if I hadn't done that.
Hmm.
Including in the very simple task of learning how to write a text, right from the way in which humanities references what kind of idea of research of an idea, going behind the idea. For
Hmm.
example, the standard thing about just the referencing, right?
Yes.
Science, why we don't reference in the way you would want to refer, the kind of referencing you do in humanities. But that also means it's not just about referencing as a strategy, but it's also a way of thinking through a problem historically, you know
Yes.
and that was a great lesson for me when I moved into philosophy of science. I mean, when I started using this philosophy to reflect on my experience in science, that was a very important thing. Even today, I think that's what I saw. I was looking at your podcast too, and when you're talking about history of science and your own interest in history of science and writing,
Yeah.
it's such an important thing. I mean, I often tell this, right? And I'm not saying that one should be trained as a historian or philosopher to do this, and you're even doing this. But for example, you know, just to provoke, so when I was teaching this undergrad course at IISc also, I
Hmm.
find that so many students are so good and so interested. But the institutions have this big problem about teaching philosophy of science and history of science, including
Yes.
your own institute, I must say. You can edit this out, but uh,
No, no,
no,
you're saying it.
I
It's a,
really I had such a big fight with these people, man. What is their problem? What are they scared of? I know the reason I tell them is this. I ask these students, okay, you're all so intelligent, you've come through all these kinds of tough tests. Okay. You explain to me what mass is.
Mm.
How did it happen that, so in the ISC course, you know what I did?
Huh.
I went back, I took Newton's Principia, the first
Nice.
section,
Very
and
nice.
then I took Einstein's 1905 paper and the general theory of relativity paper, and we discussed it like we would discuss a text, and said, you have not seen Newton's work. If
Fantastic.
you want to understand where classical physics begins,
Begin.
ask yourself. And he begins, I mean, right from his first three laws, he begins by saying mass is quantity of matter, and he defines it. And he said, what is mass? What is this idea of matter that you think you know? And everybody says, yeah, I know mass is quantity of matter. What is this idea of matter? Where is it coming from?
Mm.
What does Newton mean by that? And in fact, Newton, I think it was quite a surprise to many of the students to even realize that Newton was well aware of the limitations of what he was doing, including his derivation of the classical laws. In the whole first section, he's talking about what is mass and what is force. He, in the end of it, he says, well, all these are mathematical forces. They're not real. Don't worry. They are just fictitious. I've just created this world of fiction for us to do something. At the end
Mm.
of it, he wants, it's a very beautifully rhetorical argument of trying to connect it to reality.
Connectable.
But
Yes.
the point is how what, to even recognize for these students that there are different types of masses. Where
Mm. Mm.
exactly does the history of mass come from, etc. For me, the greatest learning there was, for example, from Max Jammer's book, The Concepts of
Mm.
Mass, Force, and Space, and so on, which really
Mm.
showed me the importance of a history of science approach to teaching science. And I tell all these guys, all the science institute guys who are so worried
Mm.
about thing. When I was at NIAS, I was talking to one professor at physics department, and many of you may know him, Arnab, and he was very interested in also in
Mm.
philosophy. He had written a
Yeah.
piece in
Yeah.
social studies of
Yeah.
science. So, and he said, with him, I thought both of us will teach a course on philosophy of science, philosophy of
Nice.
physics to physics
Mm.
department at ISC. And he proposed it also. Then he comes back and tells me, that the department does not want to allow us to do it. I said, why? I mean, I can understand they didn't want me to allow me to do it because although within the
Mm.
campus, but we are an outside organization. But I
Mm.
was going to be doing it, so they had a rule for having co-faculty along with the faculty in the department, and Arnab wanted to do it with me. And he said, well, it's because the department thinks this is soft discipline, and it will deviate students from doing the hard work of physics. So the department didn't give us permission to do it. This was 20 years before the undergrad program and all started.
Such a shame. Such a shame.
Uh,
Mm. Such a shame.
yeah, in a sense, but then I would be offering courses, and students from ISC would be coming. Once we
Mm.
had NIAS, we had the infrastructure, the same
Yeah.
campus,
Yeah. Right.
and
Mm.
I remember the one of the people who are actually most interested, who allowed this in ISC at that time, was actually Umapati and Arunan. I saw that
Mm.
you have done
Yeah.
a podcast with
Yes.
Arunan.
Yes. Arunan. With
And
Arunan, I did.
yeah, even now, if there's any discussion on science, I can go and have it with these people in the
Absolutely.
chemistry department. And in fact, when my book "What Is Science" came out,
Mm.
which is part of the National Book Trust, the first discussion of it was at IPC,
Wonderful.
and we had it in the big seminar hall. So many of the students and others
Mm.
came. We had a great discussion on just thinking about, what is it that philosophy of science does. But it was very difficult to do it in the other departments in that sense,
Mm.
like particularly the physics, which I was interested in, until this, the undergrad program came on and so on.
It's
So,
actually very, very interesting. At this point, we'll surely continue on this particular
sure.
point, but it's very counterintuitive because uh, if one looks at, let's say, late 1800s,
Yeah,
or even before that, a lot of physics which was taught was from a historical context.
yeah.
For example, Ernst Mach has series
Mm,
of books where everything actually, he's actually a physicist who is teaching
correct.
physics, and everything he's teaching actually has a historical context. As you
Mm,
properly mentioned, that he gives an overview of understanding what is the concept behind mass, energy,
yeah,
etc.
yeah,
And in fact, one of the major problems, even when I teach physics to our own
yeah,
undergrad students, is that it becomes too contemporary. I'm
Mm.
not telling it should not be applicable, but it is
Yeah.
too contemporary because they will only look at, let's say, thermodynamics only as something which is necessary to drive an engine. But
Yeah.
if they lose the context of
Absolutely correct.
where this question
Yeah.
really came from. In fact,
Yeah.
I have argued on my blog and even on the podcast telling that you will not be able to even understand, leave aside, retain any important concepts without knowing the context in which it was created. Because
Mm.
you can't actually learn everything only from some kind of a problem solving,
Yeah.
kind of an
Absolutely.
exercise. Because the story is not there in your mind,
Mm.
how it
Mm.
actually began.
Yeah.
And in fact, that's actually a big concern whenever we teach
Yeah.
physics. I feel that that is also something I learned from your course when I
Mm.
actually
Yeah.
interacted with you. And also Rodham Narasimha was there in
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
particular course,
Right.
and Narasimhan was
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
there.
Correct. Yeah.
It really gave us a great exposure because I was an undergrad, and I
Yeah.
saw that you can also look at science in a different way.
Correct.
And it is actually a very enjoyable way of learning science. In fact, that is something I it's my realization. But
Mm.
it is actually a missed opportunity, I think, even among technologists, right?
Yeah.
Technology has some
Absolutely.
beautiful sociology and history to this.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
this is such a shame, Pawan. What you say is
Mm,
so true. I
mm,
mean, I don't know why they don't do it. I mean, I also take a little more
mm.
harsher position, and I can just share it with you. And the harsher
Yeah,
position is that I
please.
think because we don't contextualize the history of ideas and how
Mm,
people got ideas, and as you correctly said, you present it in a contemporary setting.
mm,
What happens is you think that what produces that idea is that mind,
mm.
so we produce narrative of science as genius minds,
Right.
not as a social mind, as a something in which social influences have produced it. For us, it's always, oh, that's why all these Europeans are doing it. That's why Indians
Yeah.
can't do science. Where are
Yeah.
we in all these stories of science? Why we are not there? Because, there's something special to their mind. No, it's not special to the mind. It's the context. It is a
Context.
history from which they are responding to. If Newton was not responding and critiquing Descartes,
Mm.
he would not be doing what his theories are. In fact, the title of his book is also a variation of the title of a book of Descartes, the
Very nice.
Principia Mathematica.
Nice material.
He's unless you have that history in which you are taking that you're critiquing a conceptual history. So here you say Mars has come because some apple fell on Newton's head. So that Mars, come on, that is not the way ideas work. It's such a long. You look at Newton's example. So when we do this
Mm.
example of the laws of motion, the question of inertia is not new to Newton. It's very old. It goes back to where, I mean, even Galileo talks about it. Kepler has this wonderful phrase. I think it is there in Jammer's book. He calls inertia as plumpness of matter. You know,
Nice.
it's plump. It doesn't want to move. It doesn't want to change its state, basically, right? I mean, the couch potato terminology is what calls as inertia. And Newton's understanding of inertia is wrong. In the sense, he
Mm.
sees it as a force, which it is
Voice.
not. But
Mm.
that variation has to come much later. But what I'm trying to say is when they do it that way, it's not about that Newton was right or wrong. It's a fact that he could think of something original. And the
Nice.
how did he do it? And for me, that was what teaching physics was, especially these ISC students who are so bright. But how do they produce ideas? Not assume that these terminologies have been given to them, right? And I mean, as I said, the harsh point I'm saying is that is it because we have not students tend to look at science as such a derivative imposed discourse that we have not really made the kind of breakthroughs we should be doing. I mean, that's one
Mm.
part. That's why I said it's a more harsher question. Look, I myself don't believe in it fully because we
Mm.
have great scientists like all of you here. So that's not the issue. But why then is it happen? I mean, there's this very important sociological reason, but it is also a question of large number of very bright students losing out on the capacity to make sense of science.
Absolutely.
Which perhaps they take ownership. if they talk about thermodynamics in terms of what is happening in their garbage outside their house,
So correct.
they
So
might,
correct.
yeah. And why are our science institutes resisting it so much? You know how difficult it has been to have humanities department in IITs and ISS,
Hmm.
and even today, you know how difficult it is to have a philosophy hiring in all your institutes, IITs and ISS.
Absolutely. Absolutely. In
It's
fact, that's
ridiculous, yeah.
Hmm,
You know,
hmm,
I'm okay. Again, I'm not saying all science students exposed to this will be better, do better science. Not at all. You know, that's a very
hmm,
false argument, empirically wrong, because you had
hmm,
great scientists who didn't do philosophy but did great science. That's not the question. But I'm talking about it in terms of numbers. So, for
hmm,
example, when ISER Mohali was started,
hmm.
for Satyanarayana was the first director
Yeah.
from IIT Kanpur, right?
Hmm, hmm,
Um, and so he had asked because he was very interested in humanity because in
hmm.
Kanpur they had a very good humanity, so he wanted something like that. So when they started only, I was part of the curriculum committee. So the
Nice.
first 3 years I was a member of the committee, and we designed the various courses. So because he was very open, I could all try and push history of science, philosophy of science, and
Hmm.
three other courses in sociology. And I thought Indian society and all should be core courses for these students.
Yes.
And we did it, and I still remember that the science
I think
faculty
Rajesh,
were there.
Rajesh Kochar was also there, I suppose, right?
He
Rajesh
came
Kochar.
after, yeah.
After that. Oh,
He
okay.
came as he was at Nistats at that time,
Yeah, yeah.
and he came as a visiting professor for some
Hmm.
time there.
Okay, okay.
But so when we started this program for the first batch of undergrad students, immediately in the we had a faculty meeting after our
Hmm,
committee meeting. There were a couple of external people like me and somebody else was there.
hmm,
They have, they have a very good physics group and all that, maths and that group. This is when it first started, right?
hmm,
And there are some faculty there, and the first semester they asked me to come and teach philosophy of science because
hmm.
they said we don't know where to get and all. So I went and taught also the students on module on philosophy of science.
Yeah.
And then we had the meeting and the faculty meeting, and then one of the faculty said, the chemistry person, he said, why don't you leave your PowerPoints with us? So, because they're saying their point was, why should we build a humanities department? Why
Hmm.
should we have to hire people in all this? And then this person tells me, we leave your PowerPoint with us, and we will teach that course. Okay. I said,
Okay.
I was like, for a change, normally I'm very polite, I think. Um, I don't know, others should say it. But then, that day I couldn't keep my mouth shut. I told him, I always have had a great desire to teach chemistry. So please give me your PowerPoint and I would love to come and teach chemistry.
So wonderful.
But the director was so upset and he told them, no, 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 we don't, we want, this is the whole point of setting up a humanities. So
Yeah.
it needed that kind of an individual. So in that, when it started, it was like that,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But um, most of the other IITs and ISS, it's been so difficult to get people to even think. What does ISERs and IITs do now? They hire, in the name of humanities, they'll hire 5 or 6 English department people. Okay, I have very
Yeah.
good friends in the English department and I respect their work within
Yeah.
the field of humanities. But I'm saying in a science institute,
Yeah.
it's not their mistake. I'm saying what is the vision of the scientists who are sitting there who think that only humanities they want to expose science students to is English writing because unfortunately, if all science can get rid of even that small little bit of English you guys write, they'll all be very happy because they are live in one mythical world that language is a problem and we are not dealing with the kind of language you guys do. And then they hire English people to teach them some writing or whatever it is that it's supposed to teach them. But everywhere there's been a problem. Why is it that they do not make core course, including at Pune, which had far more enlightened tradition earlier on, leadership and so on. They said everybody should do philosophy of science, not because you want them to add. So the reason I was saying this, sorry, I got distracted. In the Mohali experiment, the reason I was telling the faculty there also is that look, so one somebody said, you are again, this is a distraction for our students. They're already under a lot of pressure. Why do
Hmm.
you want to impose these 5 courses on them? So I told them it's because you are first of all a government institute. Your government is funding
Yeah.
you for doing it. You cannot produce science students who are completely ignorant of the nature of Indian society. So, and
Absolutely.
even today, you know this well. I've seen this in so many science institutes. They act as if the world outside has no caste system,
Yes. Mm.
and they have some very naive ideas of religion and how one should deal with it in the in the world society, etc. I said you are producing people on government's expense to become citizens of a country, and yet what is the demand of learning for being a citizen, not of being a good scientist? We have done, you have enough hours to make them good scientists. So that is the first thing, and then the second thing I said, told them I'll tell you after a couple of years. So the third year, when I went there, we went around. I said, as a committee, I want to go to your batch of students who had started off, and I want you to meet them. I want to also meet them and see what has happened in this training,
Sure.
such good training that they get. And I'm very envious of ISIS. If
Mm.
we all did a BSc in such institutions with the research, etc., I'm sure there would have been far greater number of people who would have entered science. Okay, so
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think it's a great initiative. But we went to that class. This is
Mm.
the first batch that come. And then there are smaller batch, I think it was about 30. And then with all of them there, the committee, the faculty, and the director, I asked them, how many of you are going to continue to do research?
Mm.
How
Mm.
many of you are not going to do research in science? 20 to 30% put their hand up and said, we're not going to continue to do research in science. Then I asked this faculty, I said, then tell me why you
Mm.
produce a syllabus thinking that everybody is going to be a scientist. But what you have done is actually you have produced science literate. You've given a great training to these people, and you're going to lose them. They're going to take MBA, and you think that's all going to go to waste. So I said that
Exactly.
is why you have courses in history of science, science policy, science
Mm.
education,
Education.
philosophy of science. Somebody will enter into that and they'll do well because of your training in science. You know,
Absolutely correct.
and this is so true, right? We, I must also share this with you. I know we're digressing, stop me anytime, but
No, no, no. Please,
this
please
is
continue. This is exactly
no,
the whole point about the discussion is this. Please.
yeah, and I'll give you another example of
Yeah.
how much this whole point about science education bothers me. I was in, some this National Science Day somewhere, sometime I get pulled into some talk on doing some science, etc. This time, I remember last time we did one in Chennai. My Tamil translation of what is science had come,
Mm.
and I'd done this talk for this. It's a Muslim publication group which had done it, and we
Mm.
had done it in a. It is very interesting to do these things. It's not like science institutes because most of these groups, they're all activists or
Mm.
NGOs or small
Mm.
groups like this. They don't have big buildings and no facilities, even for chai.
Mm.
And so I had to talk about this book in Triplicane, on the main road of Triplicane, in a room which had no rickety fans. But a small room, so many people come. Many of them are these students and activists and others. It's a very different learning idea of the kind of group which comes into this, right? So this time I was called to this place, and I'd wanted to go there also.
Mm.
It's a government women's college, and as a physics teacher, you will really enjoy the story. There's a physics, there's a government women's college in Mailadurai, what used to be called Mayoram,
Mine.
and a very small town, okay,
Mm.
near
Mm.
Kumbhakotam. And
Mm.
apparently, this is a very old government college for women. It's a government college for women, and it's very well known there. And there are a lot of very interested students apparently. The principal of that I'd known from some context, and she had said, you have to come and talk to our students because otherwise people like you don't come. And like what she meant is people who are in institutions like IIC, Bangalore, and all don't go to any of these places. So I said, definitely I would wanted to go because I do
Mm.
a lot of this in various colleges and schools anyway. So I went. And I thought I said I'll do a work. Everywhere I go, I'd now like to do workshop because I can spend a lot of time with students. This lecture of 1 hour getting out, it's too much of pain for me to travel and do all that. So I
Mm.
do this 2 days, three, like this children's workshop I did in Hegodu. It's a
Yeah.
4 day workshop. So all
Mm.
students stay there and we do full day with them. So
Nice.
something substantial can be done in our own
Done.
time, not trying to cram something. So here also is a 2 day workshop we'll do. And I wanted to do it on philosophy. And I was telling them we can try. She went on saying, first time I went to meet her, she brought all the physics people. The physics
Mm.
department people came. And they said, no, we want you to talk to our physics students. And I always have this soft spot for physics and maths. I can't, and as I said, given a chance, I would anyway like to teach it. So
Yeah.
I said, yeah, and I tried telling them, what about humanities, social science, literature, and they don't have philosophy and all that.
Mm.
None of them are interested. Nobody wanted to do that. So I said, okay. So first day, I met all the MSc students in physics in this government college in Mayavaram. Most of them are first generation. Many
Nice.
of them,
Mm.
Pound, you'd be really, I'm sure you've seen many of this like this, but I can tell you
Mm.
this really struck me and moved me because all these are girls who come from very poor families, most of them.
Mm. Mm.
There are
Mm.
cases of people first time even coming into these things like masters and then
Mm.
PhD. There are 7 or 8 of them are doing PhD. The first
Wonderful.
meeting I had, all the PhD students came to me. The only thing they
Mm.
said, they thought because I was coming from Bangalore
Mm.
and I probably knew all these institutes here. They
Mm.
said, we want your help. We need. They do some synthesis and they have to send it for
Mm.
analysis to some labs.
Ah,
They said
characterization.
something. They said nobody replies to us. No, we
Mm.
have to send it. And then I asked them, where do you do it? Where is the lab? They said no. Each one of them, and this was a great shock to me that day.
Mm.
They said we spend 50,000 or more rupees of our own money just to buy material for their research.
My word.
And
Mm.
this principal was telling me their parents have sold their land and house so that these women can come and do a PhD in physics with no funding and no funding for materials to do research. Yeah. I was
Research.
really
Yes.
pissed off because I said, I look at all these science institutes, so much of money we pay these people.
Mm.
And we say that science, no money is there, people are not doing science, etc. And none, I asked them, did you write to DST? They said, yeah, nobody replies to us. They say we are a college here. And these
Mm.
girls, they speak in English, but they are far more comfortable in Tamil, of course.
Mm.
You know, and they're doing PhD because some of them are really interested by this whole opening of this world, but many of
Mm.
them are also doing it because for their jobs. With this they get
Jobs.
a job, which is great. Okay,
Yeah.
but the point is, imagine a PhD student in any of your institutions, having to sell their house to buy chemicals and material
Mm.
so that they can get a PhD degree, and then so then I did this workshop with them, and it was really fascinating. Yeah. Just engaging with them,
Mm.
talking to them about all these ideas of what they could do. What is it to do physics? How is it to do research? How, because many of them want to do research.
Mm.
So at the end of it, just to give you one example, one girl comes up to the stage. There are 200, people are there in long hall,
Mm.
and then she comes and she says, "I want to do PhD." I think she said something in chemistry or something.
Mm.
And her teacher told her, "You will cannot do PhD. You don't have any qualification to do PhD. You will not be able to do a PhD." It didn't that when she said it, it didn't affect her. Okay, she was very brave. She said, "I that when I told the teacher I want to do it, she told me. I told her, and Tamilians are dramatic, right? So
Mm.
she said, I told her that I will be sitting next to you after I finish my PhD. I'll be a teacher like you. I'm going to finish my
Wow.
PhD and come."
Mm.
I said, "Oh, that's great." And then she said, then I asked, then some person then told her, it seems, then she asked how to do PhD and all, because they have no clue, yeah, what is it to do, how
Mm.
to even do this, right? So a lot of the stuff that what I was doing with them was about that, to give them the confidence that if they want, they can do it. There are schemes and stuff. And she said she asked somebody, and that guy told her, "You need 1 lakh to do PhD."
Wow. Okay. Mm.
Okay. Till then, she spoke everything, nothing disturbed her. She said this and she started crying.
Mm. Mm.
Because you can see the kind of thing they're coming from, right? That they feel that they want to do it, and they feel that there's something about science that they want to do. And we have all these organizations which keep saying they want to support science. Here are these girls doing PhD with absolutely no support, with absolutely
Mm.
nobody going there and just giving them basic information on most trivial things.
Trivial things. Yes.
And for
Yes.
her, of course, 1 lakh was like too much to even think of. And she thought all her dream. And without her volition, she just broke down. Then we all told her, if you're anyway going to do, there are ways to do it, and
mm,
people will help and all that stuff. But I'm just saying that is the kind of situation these people are doing. And that evening, I went to their hostel. The
mm,
principal was also was, and she had called us for dinner with all these girls there.
mm,
And one of the girls was doing MSc in physics. I told her, "Get me your book. I want to see what you guys study."
mm,
Then she brings me the MSc physics book. Okay, I'm reading it. I'm saying, "Look, this is what we did in IIT and Purdue, yeah,
mm,
and you're doing it for these kids. Why?
mm,
You think they're teachers to teach them that?" They were doing thermodynamic, statistical physics,
mm,
this Gibbs, then the phase,
mm.
and
Yes. Mm,
all that stuff. I'm like, it's really advanced. No,
mm,
my point about science education is this: everything in science, including in this village, if you're teaching that, okay, what are you teaching for? Do you think everybody is going to become a theoretical physicist or
mm.
whatever? Is that what your books are meant for? I mean, they're written as if it's meant for that, right?
Yes. Yes.
And how many of them actually go on to do it? So even in a place like ICER, the number of percent, I don't know what it is today, but you must be having a rough idea, right?
Yeah.
How
Yeah.
many students actually go
Roughly
on to
about
do
50,
PhD in
fifty
science?
percent 50% may go
See,
into research. Maybe. Maybe.
what about the other 50%? And we have
Mm,
built a whole infrastructure thinking 100% is going to go to research. And what we could have taught those girls in MSc physics,
mm,
in
mm,
a ways in which would have liberated them in so many other ways. You could have thought of a syllabus, right?
mm.
Excuse me. But instead, we do this, and they have no clue. I mean, they were like, this girl was like so gung ho, said, "Yeah, sir, we're reading all this, we will understand, we'll do it."
Mm, mm.
But there are
No,
30, 40
no,
people.
this is a very important point what you're mentioning, because this is actually generally a framework of education itself. If
Mm,
you look at it per se, to give an analogy, uh, somebody is thrown into a cricket field without knowing the rules of the game. It's like
yeah.
asking somebody to really, like, you bring an American, a die-old American, and ask them to play cricket. And
Right.
for somebody who is aware of the rules and regulations of the game, for us it's very trivial to play the game. But for somebody who doesn't have any idea at all, you ask them to actually do something without knowing what are the nitty-gritties of that. In fact,
Mm,
that's where probably philosophy and history actually plays a critical role, because you at least know what in a slightly broader context, what is the meaning of something you do. As you
yeah.
mentioned, if I want to really characterize something or do some material preparation, etc., it might actually be relevant at that moment and that point of
Mm.
time. But in a larger framework, how will it probably have a difference to one's life?
And
Because
in one's life and in their own work also, how are they going to be more creative?
creative, yeah.
How are they going to do? Let them do whatever they want, even in physics or any other field. How are they going to, do their own work in a very different manner? And of course, sociology is something which everybody, including your own institute,
Mm,
has such a deep allergy to, because
mm.
they think sociology of science is anti-science. But yet, when we talk to people across and ask them why is it that these deep-rooted caste issues or gender issues in Indian
Mm.
science, you can't just say it's anti-science. It's a sociological study of science. In
Thanks.
fact, there's another very interesting story from Sharat. Sharat Ananthamurthy, the famous
Ananthamurthy, yeah, yeah.
VC. And he was telling me when he was in Bangalore University, he had tried to set up all these labs and stuff. And he was very interested in getting many of the students here. And
Yes. By
he
the way,
was saying,
Sharat has taught
yeah,
me. I did my master's in
oh,
MSc.
is
Yeah, yeah.
it? Oh my God,
And
yeah,
I should
Sharat.
also mention, I
Uh,
forgot to mention, I was a postdoc at Purdue too.
oh, in the physics department.
Yeah,
With
in
whom?
Discovery Park. I was in Discovery Park. Actually, there is
Oh,
a separate center
okay, okay,
called
okay,
Discovery.
okay.
Yeah, I was in
Oh
the
my God.
engineering
Okay,
department.
okay, yeah, okay. No, Sharat was saying, for example, he said in his lab when he had got some students, he was saying that many of them who came from the
Yeah,
semi-urban areas,
urban area,
they
exactly.
were
Yeah.
very good. But
Hmm.
he said, he said the pity is that many of them will not be able to get it. They don't get into a PhD program because he thought they would have become great experimenters. But he
Yes,
said that
precisely.
because our exam systems and the kind of, these walls which are present for certain kind of people to get in and not, it could be subconscious in various ways.
Yes.
We said it's a great pity that most of them don't get into our programs, he said. you know and for me the question is, we have lost great physics minds from that. Because again,
Absolutely correct.
if we had done history of science, if we had looked at the great people who are today seen as great scientists and how
Mm.
they made their discoveries and so on, you would discover it was not through these kind of processes,
No.
right? Why?
Precisely right.
Yeah.
No, Michael Faraday was a bookbinder. He actually had great hands-on skills. Even
Yeah,
to a later part of his life, he was not that
right.
good in mathematics, but he was outstanding experimentalist. There
And
are there are examples from the past. Yeah.
absolutely. And then we have an entrance exam and we give them all these high speed maths things to solve and stuff. What are we producing here, really? That's part of this larger structure of it. I'm not saying there's a simple answer is to have humanities training for everybody, but I'm saying humanities training, one, it humanizes everybody.
Mm,
Yeah, it makes them more responsible individuals, that they don't think science is something which is they're not answerable to anybody at all.
mm,
I mean,
mm,
in my own experience has been that because I wrote about something on science,
mm,
not critical in the sense, asking questions about how science is done, and especially this very naive idea they have of logic in science.
mm,
you know I've been like branded, so we are attacked so many places just because when I'm trying to teach philosophy of science, for them it's become like, oh, philosophy of science means you are attacking science,
mm, mm.
anti-science. I don't get it at all. And
No,
in
no.
fact, the reason they would do that is also to protect their turf.
Tough,
You know,
tough.
medical doctors, for example, they are notorious for this. They don't even know what science is. I mean, unlike at least all of you people who are in the field, who have an engagement with science both in its practice and day to day, these people don't even know that. They are just
Mm.
glorified, pharmacists. The practicing doctor. I mean, because I've had this very deep interaction with all the medical college people when I was in
Mm,
Manipal,
mm.
very good doctors and stuff. But the point is, when they're not doing research and they're not taught about science in that way,
Yeah.
the idea of science becomes easy to appropriate. Like they are
Mm.
doing science and nobody else is. And these are very big problems. And these problems can only be tackled with looking at science from a broader perspective,
Broader perspective.
and to be open to the democratizing impulse within science. And I think great science has come because of that. And to forget that, and to say that you can't, scientists, you can never ask a question about what
Mm.
science is doing and so on, has become a great problem. I
In
think
fact, it is
particularly India. Yeah,
very, very pertinent point because this point of looking uh, towards oneself and also questioning oneself. In fact, uh, if you go outside and you talk to people in the public forum, there is a huge trust uh, uh, regarding science and scientists in India. It's a very counterintuitive thing, right?
yeah,
Because they have
yeah,
such a very high regards towards people who call themselves scientists or who are in the pursuit of science, because that trust actually has to be also in a way kind of a two-way traffic, right? Because uh, if we have to really commit ourselves, we may have to open up and also look at ourselves whether what we are doing is right or wrong, which is
yeah,
something there. If you talk to few people, of course there is some kind of realization, but majority of the times, including, let's say, in a lot of western countries, there is a kind of a slightly more negative notion of philosophy.
yeah,
If you know that much better than me, because especially in theoretical physics, there's a lot of uh, for example, Steven Weinberg was always
yeah, yeah.
very critical about
Hawking, Weinberg, and all that.
Weinberg, yeah, all of them. But you also realize that looking at philosophy only from one viewpoint is not the way, right? For India, asking why we are doing what we are doing, especially as scientists, is very critical, as you mentioned,
Absolutely.
because majority of the benchmarks which are laid are
Yeah,
all with respect to what West is doing.
absolutely.
Surely there is something to learn in terms of, let's say, doing some mechanics of science, but
Yeah,
adaptation of science is something very different, very context specific. And
yeah,
in my opinion, I think we probably are lacking that kind of self assessment. there are great scientists, as you mentioned. There are
Ab-
fantastic people who are doing some fantastic stuff. But
yeah,
that pausing and asking ourselves why we are doing what
absolutely.
we are doing
Yeah.
may sometimes actually be lacking. I totally agree with the criticism of
No,
that stuff.
I totally agree with you, Pan. I mean, this is so true that, this one, when I was saying that I'll give you a second explanation for why
Mm.
Indian science we have not made the brilliant thing, and this is a
Yeah.
sociological explanation, which is I'm sure you're experienced it personally also. One of the first point when we teach science is to say science is a social activity, right?
Mm.
And
Mm.
science, in fact, if you look at the history of science, science is not possible without institutionalization. The only way science gets established was from, not because you got Newton and others, but because you also built the Royal Society much
Absolutely.
before any other institution came. It's a royal society which comes, produces a narrative of what it is to do science,
Science.
makes this
Yeah.
global, international, all of it, right?
Mm.
It's always
Mm.
been that. And that's why today it's only science. I mean, in philosophy, we don't have academies here.
Mm. Mm.
We don't have yearly meetings. We don't have, nobody's getting
Mm.
money for anything. There is ICPR, it's supposed to be some funding agency, but they have their money is only enough for paying lunch in conferences in Delhi. That's all. And I mean, the point is, you have how you have INSA, then you have Indian Academy of
Yeah.
Sciences, then you have another academy, then you have elect. I mean, this whole kind of ritualization of
Nation.
belonging to this science begins right from the Royal Society, right from
You're right.
Newton's. When Newton is made a
Yeah.
member of it and so on.
Memorable. Yeah.
What I'm trying to say is, which means science is a social process. It's not
Mm.
about just a cognitive process.
Mm.
Even for those who keep saying it's naively, it's about logic in some very naive
Mm.
sense. It is a social process. It's a built by a community, built through social relationships. Which means the reason why, as you said, so many good work in
Mm.
science in Indian science doesn't get the kind of prizes and other things
Mm.
it should get is because nobody's work uh, is done by one person.
Mm.
For
Mm.
example, Einstein's work, again from history of science, we know
Mm.
is not done by him. He did one part of it. For the
Absolutely.
discipline of relativity to be established, you needed thousand others to pick it up. And I often
Absolutely.
used to give this as a, an example. When I was at Purdue, that was a time when this preprint thing started, right? The
Mm.
late
Mm. Archive.
1980s.
Mm.
Yeah, they. So the first thing which it was very new to us itself at that time.
Mm.
Then we had a room in which they would put all these preprints archives. Okay, they didn't have this great system of archiving you have now. They would just send the papers and they
Mm.
would put it up on the board there. And I remember, because I was that time interested in this kind of topology and stuff. Witten's paper, everybody will be waiting because those of us who
Ah.
are in that field, or something Edward Witten, and everybody will go pick it up and then read it. And if whatever it is, somebody wants to do something, they'll come and do it, right? And
Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
came and saw some scientists in India also doing the same thing what we did as grad students, I felt really bad because what we are basically doing is taking somebody's work and enough of all of us putting the effort to make
Mm.
sure we make it, build it. And so part of the problem is how many of the scientists outside globally are willing to take gamble and take a
Mm.
chance on a paper published from somewhere in India, put their time and work trying to build it up.
Build it up. Yes. Yes.
And the fact that we don't do it means that and the worst aspect of it is we don't do it for work done in within India by ourselves. I mean, as
Yes.
an example, and again, it's as a larger sociological thing. It's not a critique of science. One very well-known science physicist in Bangalore,
Mm.
whose name I'm not saying right now,
Mm.
he was telling me,
Mm.
he has got, he's known for some field within his thing, and people, he travels all the time, out all the time.
Mm.
But he was saying, in that field, when they were having a conference, and some of his colleagues were giving a list of all the major works in it and all that, he said those people never mention his work or his name.
Mm. Mm.
People in India, some of his colleagues and maybe from other institutes in India, they will talk about some work done somewhere in Japan or US
Mm.
or Germany, but this great hesitancy to recognize and build upon
Mm.
something
Mm.
which we have produced in our own
On our
ecosystem
own time.
still not happen. I don't know if there are changes in it now. I mean, you will have a better idea of
No,
it,
in
but
fact, yeah, things actually are not that different. You're right,
is
because there is
it
always
very
some
sad
kind
to
of.
hear that? Yeah, not
Mm.
still not. We're still stuck in that thing, is it?
Yeah, there might be small changes here and there.
Yeah.
Slowly, some people actually are trying to do that because see, there is a notion that unless you really have a community, you can see that you don't have say in a lot of
Yeah,
things, even at the
absolutely.
in the global scale, and that
Yeah,
will come only when you have a reasonably large base within a particular country. And unfortunately, in India, you will see that one particular person might be an outstanding expert in something, but as
yeah,
you know, one in a such a large country is no way a representation of even a few in some other country,
yeah.
and therefore a lot of them actually have an issue of representation, and
Hmm.
they probably would miss out on a lot of things. uh, but I think there is some kind of understanding, but still very far away from
Yeah.
desirable outcomes.
And I think we have lost out a lot. I mean, people, of course, give the example of G.N. Ramchandran,
Yeah, yeah.
the DNA model, and which not if enough people had maybe
Mm,
picked it up, done, etc. Probably he should have shared the Nobel Prize.
mm,
There are examples like that. I remember when I joined NIAS, Ramana was the one who had
mm.
started NIAS,
Yeah, yeah,
and
you're right.
that time he was working on some very interesting thing. Again, a very interesting story about this whole sociology of this. He was working on, to me, it was a fascinating problem. Okay,
Mm,
and unfortunately, I was moving away from physics, and I didn't want to do, as I said, direct philosophy of science or anything to do with physics. But he was the problem he had wanted to work on, and he thought I should also have worked with
mm,
him on it because he wanted somebody to do various calculations and stuff.
mm,
He had written, and this paper was also published in Current Science. I think he had asked a really beautiful question,
mm,
and it may sound for physics people may say it sounds philosophical, or maybe they shouldn't be asking such a question. The question
mm,
was this: he had looked at all the table of fundamental particles.
mm,
Okay, so if you
mm.
take a table of fundamental particles,
Yeah,
typically they'll give you the mass and the lifetime,
yeah,
the
yeah,
half lifetime,
yeah.
right? So, yeah, half life of that. So
Mm,
he looked at that list and then asked a very interesting question: is there a relationship between mass and half life?
mm,
Okay, so the time of decay of all these particles is given. That number is known, and the mass is
mm,
known, like neutrinos, all
mm.
muons, all that whole list of things. And then he came up with an answer for it.
Interesting. Mm,
Okay, and he was deeply influenced by Buddhist logic. In fact,
mm.
my entry into Indian logic is through Ramana primarily. When I first saw this work, although
Nice.
at that time my training was I had all been at Purdue only on Western philosophy,
Mm,
and so I didn't know what this thing was on this stuff. But he had said, there's this. He was very influenced by the Shabatsky's book, Volume One
mm,
and Two, on Buddhist logic. And so I looked at it and I said, "Oh, this is very interesting that there is such a long tradition of logic. It's a fantastic tradition of logic in Indian thought, okay, which I learned much later."
mm,
But he wrote a piece. There was a lot of opposition to it from Indian scientists.
mm,
People laughed at him. That I've
mm,
had people come to me and say, "Oh, what is all this nonsense work? This is what happens when people retire and they want to continue to do something, etc." All kinds of nasty comments on what I thought was a very profound idea,
mm,
even as an idea. Okay, like any ideas, when you have maybe some solution may seem reasonable, may not,
mm.
etc. But to take that seriously, what I'm trying to say is not that it's right or wrong.
Yeah.
But if Witten had given this, okay, in our field, or I'm sure
Mm,
somebody
mm,
else like that
mm.
now, you definitely have 10 people at ISC doing it, no?
Yeah.
They're getting
Mm,
the students to do the check the calculation, maybe do some variation, do a different modeling of it.
mm,
But why is it that none of them wanted to take this up
mm,
as something which they could do and build upon, maybe say that it is right or wrong, or
mm.
maybe ask this question from a different context? All that he got was a terrible negative reaction. And then
Mm,
he actually got Professor Mitra from Delhi University, who was a very
mm,
respected physicist,
mm,
after his retirement to come and spend some time with him to see if they could do something about it.
mm.
But what I'm saying is that maybe there are so many great ideas that are being produced by our
Right.
scientists, and the Americans do that for their people,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
their community, you know and we need to figure out ways for, I mean, so these are all these kind of sociological underpinnings of what is it to do science today. And just responding to what you said, unless our students who are doing science know that, can they really be effective scientists, or are they going to become cynical, or are they going to become, again, to use a very harsh term,
mm,
just the service sector of global science?
mm, mm,
When
mm,
people talked about Infosys, and they're very critical of Infosys, they were saying it's a service sector. Our
mm,
software industry is a service sector. We don't produce IP,
mm.
right? Now, is there a danger? I mean, I'm not. I'm saying so now, definitely not, and I don't want to say it, but I'm just okay. Let me say that: is there a lot of Indian science which is the service sector?
Mm,
Where we are waiting for all these grand ideas, and then we do the dot the i's and whatever they say, right?
mm, mm.
So, is there a danger of that?
Yes.
Or will science have to come from the ground up in various ways,
Mm.
um, you know, including conceptual world? But for that, they need to have an understanding of this creature called science, to get an understanding of the whole story of what science is.
Fascinating. Fascinating. So we'll take the discussion
Yeah.
in the same chronological order what we have been going. So now that you finished your PhD at Purdue, were you already transforming yourself into philosopher, or you still continue to
Oh,
do
okay.
some?
No, I wanted to do philosophy for sure. Then I even thought maybe I should do my PhD in philosophy.
Wow.
Um,
Okay. Mm.
I had one day fleeting thought about it, but I didn't think of it philosophy as a profession when I was doing it. I was doing it because I really enjoyed it, and I thought,
Enjoy.
physics also is okay, but I think physics, as I said, physics teaching, reading is things which I really like even today. But I was not too sure about this research part, what I was really doing in that.
Mm.
But then, to get a PhD, and I'd already done all the courses in philosophy largely, and I could have got a thing. But then my prof said that I need to do, they have a language requirement for philosophy. I had to do
Mm.
a foreign language, French or German or something. And I told him I'm not going to do a foreign language,
Mm.
and they knew I'm not doing it for degree, so I didn't want to do it.
Mm.
Okay. And then, um, and I thought anyway, this is not like I don't know what profession. I mean, whatever. I didn't think through it actually, so I must confess. And I said no. And anyway, the physics PhD I was doing particle physics, something I had done. And anyway, that I would have got degree, which is much easier to get degree in physics, I think, than philosophy. And my main point is I wanted to come back to India. That has
Mm.
always been part of my thing, and so that I knew was definitely going to happen. And doing, whether to extend it to do this just for their thing of language, I wasn't sure. And then I applied to a few places, and I got a postdoc at Math Science. So I
Mm.
came back to Math Science, and you know, it's a great, lovely place and all that. But really, I think I shouldn't have done it. I should have just really shifted to philosophy as a
Mm.
core at one level. But I also think I thought after coming here and seeing, oh, I'm going to do more of the same thing, and there are very good people in Math Science, as you know.
Mm.
But I felt really alienated. I said, no, I really was struggling with having to do this kind of physics without understanding, to me, in my sense, without understanding what I was doing.
Mm. Mm.
And so actually, since I didn't study philosophy here, I knew nobody in philosophy. I didn't know,
Mm.
and in India, everything has to be
Yeah.
something. I mean, especially in our disciplines, it's such a small community,
Yeah.
like in philosophy, and all, without knowing anything. I didn't even know which universities teach what and stuff like that. And the worst thing is, after I came to India, I realized if you want to apply for a job in government, you have to have a master's or PhD in philosophy.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah.
So anyway, I hadn't thought of any of this stuff. I'd wanted to come back. I came back, and then I realized somewhere after 1 year, I tried my best to really enjoy the physics I was doing, but again, I was caught up with so much with writing. I did a lot of my fiction writing at that time and so on,
Mm.
plays and
Yeah.
stuff also.
We'll come to
But
that. By the way, Sundar has a recent book out, right? Or it's a novel where,
yeah, it's 1 year, yeah, following
yeah,
up, right.
yeah, yeah.
No, so I was doing some part. I knew that was where my interest was going, etc. So I decided. So I did one thing which was very clear in my mind. I
Mm.
said after 2 years at math science, I'm going to leave physics. So that was very clear in
Wow.
my mind.
You were
So
already thought of it. Oh. Mm.
yeah, I decided, okay, I've done this, and I really want to do more writing and stuff. Um, so I'd come back with my wife, and she was
Mm.
also humanities social science student at Purdue.
mm.
And then we landed up here, and then we said, okay, no job. I must also share this with you. You know, when I came for a postdoc, the salary was 2,300 rupees. Okay,
What?
yeah, that was 92 when I joined
Okay.
Math.
Mm,
And I was very excited because I had gone from here after my masters, and those days we thought whatever money. This is the first salary I was earning. I mean, Purdue was a different
mm,
thing, but here in India, and I thought, wow, it's a lot of money.
mm.
And then I come here, okay, and then I realize even my cousins were not done anything, are like saying, you came for 2,300, how are you going to stay? And then my parents are also there at that time, and we took a house in Indira Nagar near Mad Science. I remember
Mm.
the rent was $1,800.
Oh man.
And I said, where? And then I really realized that, it's really sad that Indian science had to actually go through that phase. It's
Mm.
really idiotic for all these people who struggle to do, PhD, whatever it is. There is a
Yeah.
drive and they had something to do. And actually, I mean, thankfully, the situation has changed a lot now.
Yeah.
But then I realized, okay, even if there is no money, and we said both of us decided, we're not going to do it. And in fact, very interestingly, what we did is we're writing a little bit here and there for newspapers. So we went to meet N. Ram at Frontline.
Oh, okay.
And this is in
Later
94.
Hindu. Hindu. He was.
Yeah, he was Frontline Hindu. He was running all of that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so he was very nice about it. He said, come home. So we went to his house.
Mm,
And then we told him, really, what we want to do is to write. And he said, yeah, very good. You can write for Frontline. But he said he was more interested in political writing. you
mm,
know I was more interested in social, cultural,
mm,
and
mm,
including philosophical writing in that sense. But that time itself he was very clear about what his politics was, and he said, if you write
mm,
about that politics, I can, you can come and write for me.
mm,
But I was like very doubtful. That's the kind of stuff I wanted to do. But then I thought, let me look for some, not philosophy, but there's no philosophy positions. There's
mm,
at all. I wrote to NISTAD. Somebody said, they do history of science or something.
mm,
And NISTADs, and then somebody said there's a new institute called NIAS which has started here.
mm,
So
mm.
I wrote to these two people. But we had decided, we will make a life out of just writing or doing something. So
Wow.
it can be
Mm.
too bad. Let's take a chance and do it. And I think there was this whole romance of the beaches of Chennai and
Ah.
eating idli dosas and all that. He said, oh, somehow we can survive. It's not a big problem.
Mm.
And then I went to Nistats. I must say, I was very surprised. I got a job at Nistats too.
Oh,
Again,
okay.
there was a director that was very candid. It was on philosophy. They wanted, there were some good
Mm,
people there. I think, that time Dhruv and others were also at
mm,
Nistats. And then the Nias people, they called me also. And I realized later, because, Ramanos had become very interested in philosophy of science.
mm.
And then here B.V. Srikantan was the TFR director, had
Theory.
also joined
Yeah. Yeah.
NIAS. And Srikantan had become very interested in consciousness studies.
Conscious. Yes. Yes.
He, for some reason, he had become very. So it was an institute of these two, three people.
Mm,
And they were, it's more like a club J.R.D. Tata had started. And
mm, mm,
it was very interesting. I think it was a really remarkable imagination there. And they wanted to bridge academic life with the world, the
Word. Yeah.
business sector, and the
Mm,
decision makers of India. So it's a
mm,
very nice thought by which it started. And so Ramana and Srikantan called me for an interview. And
mm,
that time I must tell you this also about when we talk about the
mm,
question of liberalism and democracy in science.
mm.
Um, I used to have very long hair for a very long time.
Yes. Yes. I know. You had.
Unruly, unruly look. I'm sure when you came for the summer school too. So imagine 94, I go for an interview. Okay, my hair was probably wilder and longer. And Ramanna and Srikantan were there. And I had an interview with them. Okay.
Uh,
And they were very nice. I mean, we had a long discussion about various things. But the thing I did, because whenever people they see us moving from physics to other disciplines, they
mm,
feel like, maybe they have been very traumatized individuals, or maybe they have some psychological problems and
yeah.
all. So first point is that, oh, there's something wrong with you. And then the way I was looking, it was a bigger problem for them. But so thankfully for NIAS, I'd asked all my recommendation letters. The moment I
Mm,
decided to quit math science, all my recommendations came from my philosophy profs. I didn't
ah,
want any of the, I didn't
yeah.
want to, you know, go on somebody saying from physics. That world was out for me. So I
Yeah.
said, if you think this is what matters, then I want to do it this way.
Mm.
So they had written records, etc., for me, both the profs. And then I went under Ramanath Chiran were very open and very nice. I think they were slightly maybe worried about it, in a
Mm.
sense, seeing me and all that. But I think after they got the records, etc., they probably changed their mind. So then they
Mm.
offered, they had nothing to do. They just wanted to start something. There's no
Mm.
established program, there's
Yeah.
no
Yeah.
library, nothing. So I said, "Oh, great! IISc came back to Bangalore, old
Mm.
haunt and all that." So it was a great, for me at least, it opened up a professional career.
Mm.
But it's not a good career for anybody who at that age to get into, because
Mm.
this is not a research institute. This is not
Mm.
a humanities institute. We had three or four great people. I mean, other than Ramana Srikantan, M.N. Srinivas was the
Yes.
father of
Yeah.
Indian sociology, was there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So, but they were all already,
Mm.
they are not
Stalwart.
making a profit. They are already stalwarts, and things like which we need, like basic
Yeah.
funding for travel, books, things, and research system setup,
Mm.
programs. Nothing was there.
Nothing.
But
Yeah.
I think those years I was there was really good, because my mind, it allowed for a person like me whose mind is, who wants to think, that I want to think freely.
Mm. Mm.
There was no restrictions of any
Great.
kind. And you know all these years, none of them, including Raman, were always in coat and tie.
Mm.
Okay, none of them came
Yeah.
without the coat and tie. And the flagship course of NIAS was the Tata's course. The
Mm.
JRD had started this course. And after I joined the first year itself, Ramana told me, you take care of that, in charge of that course.
Mm.
So I was in charge of that course, where we would only get, MDs, then
Mm.
joint secretaries of government, all of them coming together for a course,
Of course.
which
Yeah.
was really conceptualized by Ramanand Kapoor, who was a very good psychiatrist. And I was supposed to run it. I never wore a coat and never wore a tie at NIAS. I
Mm.
would wear this many
Yeah.
times, this
Yeah.
kurti, jubba, and go.
Yeah.
And not once has any of them told me,
Mm.
said, you will have to dress like this or speak like this or get your hair cut and come. Nothing. I mean, and for them, it's a bit of a problem, because even the Tatas, when they come, the Tatas are a corporate company.
Mm.
All the
Yeah.
representatives who come, they are very proper,
Proper.
very proper people, right?
Good.
But there was this great spirit of saying,
Yeah.
yeah, this is what we are doing, including in
Nice.
the context of doing research in science or social science or whatever. And that was there at that time when we first came in. And a lot of things have changed, but that I thought that was a very interesting time to be in at NIAS in Bangalore. Um, Very
Fascinating.
difficult,
Fascinating.
yeah, but very difficult to set up programs, because there's so
Program.
much antagonism to social science
Mm.
and humanities. Even today
Mm.
in Bangalore,
Yeah.
it's so difficult to set up any.
Yeah, it's
There's very,
unfortunate because if you
yeah.
look at even very big institutions across the world,
Mm,
the immediate thing which comes into mind is MIT, where there
mm.
is, which is essentially a technological school, but you can see Chomsky rules there in the sense,
Absolutely. And
and he's a,
this is the point I've been telling these people. I said, even with IISc, now they're
yeah.
starting a medical school.
Mhm.
Medical school, medical education is most closest to social science than technical
Yeah, yes,
biology,
you're right.
because of various reasons, right? Including its engagement with human
Engagement,
beings,
engagement.
even what it means to do research in medicine,
Yeah,
etc., etc. It has a long, connection. Even biology itself has a very close connection to social sciences. Now, why is it that IISc will not? They had some vague department called Center for Contemporary Studies. Well,
yeah.
I don't know what happened to that. Now it's called Center for Society and Policy,
Mm.
in which I was there for some time. It's largely run on management principles. I mean, it's basically
Mm.
management studies within, in the name of science studies.
Mm.
Why is it that none of them recognize that having a science study, good departments in other disciplines, is actually a plus point for a university?
University,
Like you were
absolutely.
saying about the MIT case, right?
Mm. True.
It's a very big problem everywhere, and I don't know. I mean, it's also because science communities are very lot of power.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah,
although
true,
they keep
true.
telling us no, but they do have a lot of power. Is the net connection gone bad?
No, no.
You
So one of the things which is fascinating, and I really wanted to, pick your brain on, was your prolific writing and the whole process of putting your thoughts into words. This is something, one of the things which, in my opinion, science and scientists may have to do a little bit more, because they do write a lot of papers, many a times comprehensible only to their peers,
Mm.
and the coupling of that knowledge to society has been an issue. Second is, I felt that whenever humanities researchers write, most of the time, especially when they write op-eds and other things, they are much more, connecting to the general audience without having to compromise the rigor of their own subject, which is sometimes difficult for, let's say, natural sciences to do. But there is some particular way out one has to actually look up. uh, I felt that many of your books are really deep, and yet they are comprehensible, and something anybody who has understanding of basic notions would be able to appreciate it. So much so that I have to again re-emphasize the book on philosophy for children is
Mm.
an excellent read. In fact, I would, of course,
Thank you.
you know uh, link it in the show notes, the link of that particular page on which, of course, I'll link all the details of Sundar also in that particular show notes. So tell us a little bit more about that, Sundar, because you have been, very prolific. As people who want to really put their thoughts across, it's not just only for social science.
Yeah,
Anybody I'm talking
sure.
about, there is a lot to learn for us, and I think you would be the right person to really also talk about
Yeah, no, I think a lot of my writing came as part of my research
that.
uh, work, in that sense, in the sense that, for me, uh, what is it to do research in philosophy, for example? So,
Mm,
uh, so when we ask that question, some people will look at doing research in philosophy as looking at texts very carefully, looking at what the author said and various things. It's a kind of a that kind of approach is very much present. But for me, my interest in doing philosophy was that it allowed me a way to understand science. For example, I often
mm,
say, I understood what I was doing as a physics student after I did philosophy by asking some very like
mm,
questions of what is a concept, how does a
mm,
concept come, etc. Were all like eliminating for me. And so I, if you look at my writings, other than all these papers, etc., which are
mm.
driven by various specific
Yeah,
constraints of
yeah.
conferences and so on, um, each of my book is actually a product of a particular research question I began with. So, for example, the first one called Translating the World, which
Mm,
is, I
mm,
think, one of my more interesting work, which began with a simple question: how do scientists read a book?
mm,
Like
mm,
if I open a physics book, it is not like a book which is written in just English, right?
mm,
It is what we call as a multi-semiotic system, because it
mm.
uses symbols, pictures, graphs, English, and it is moving across. It's like a comic book, actually. It's using different systems, and
Absolutely.
how is it producing coherent meaning? So it is a
Mm,
larger question. I was talking from textual studies and
mm,
theory of
mm.
meaning and language. I think the question of language has always been central to my
Yeah,
ethos.
there are a lot of very good talks also online of
Yeah,
Sundar.
and for me, all about language, that kind of a question. So here the question was, how do we read it and make meaning of it? So when I
Mm,
read a novel, I know how I'm making meaning in some sense. But how I do it, what is the system by which we make sense of it? So I drew a lot from all my continental philosophy
mm,
practices. There are a lot of questions of theories of meaning, etc. Trying to
mm,
answer this question. That's all. So for me, the whole book was an answer to that question.
mm,
And in
mm,
particular, I was very interested in the question of mathematics. And because I was always reacting to this question whenever people tell me, natural language, which is English and spoken language,
mm,
or ambiguous, but mathematics is precise.
mm,
And the whole point is it's exactly the reverse.
mm,
And what
mm,
is it that mathematical writing does? What is the
mm,
meaning of a mathematical symbol? What sense is it precise? So I think that's really been one of my better,
mm,
works, which I really liked. It was very insightful to me also. what is the nature of mathematical writing and what is the notion of meaning in mathematics. So there's a whole section, big part of it is on that, and also about theoretical writing in the sciences. So,
Mm.
this is actually what happened. I joined NIAS in '94. This book came out in 2000. This is part of my Homi Baba fellowship,
Mm.
and
Mm.
I had to write a book for it, so it made sure that I would write this, and it actually gave me a deeper insight into science and particularly theories in physics. For example, I was often struck, when you look at gauge theories, you
Mm. Mm.
suddenly you will have then they will say it's a mass term.
Mm.
Why is it a mass term? Because it's a term which arises in an expression half AB squared,
Mm.
which looks like half MB squared. So
Mm.
whatever A is, you can identify it as a mass
Kind
term,
of that.
right?
Yeah.
So much of the mass association in
Mm.
field theories and even quantum mechanics, even classical, like
Yeah.
two body problem,
Yeah.
reduced mass association is only from recognition of a pattern.
Uh,
But the
okay.
pattern is not a physical pattern, it's a mathematical pattern. So
Fantastic.
anytime I get a term AB squared kind of a
Mm.
thing, I know I can look at that term as a mass term.
Mm. Mm.
But then the mystery was once I identified as a mass term, I now discover a particle associated with that mass. So what is this process? How is it that language, through pattern recognition of this particular kind, open up a new physical world?
Fascinating.
You know,
Fascinating.
yeah, and to me, that question resonates throughout. Even today, the question of mathematics and the sciences is to me a very important question. So I wrote the book about that, right? And this was, I would say, technical in the sense, more
Mm.
drawing from this content and philosophy tradition and so on. Then I did another. My second book was Philosophy of Symmetry. Again,
Mm.
began as a simple one-line question
Mm.
because obviously in doing particle physics, we know symmetry is so important.
Mm.
But then with work in arts, etc., we also know symmetry is so important. So I
Mm.
just asked the question, what is this concept of symmetry? That's all.
Mm. Mm.
And how should I understand? Because for scientists, it's very simple invariance under transformation. With
Mm.
that one line, I can define everything symmetry in condensed matter, particle physics, everything, right? Architecture, and so on.
Yes. Yes.
What does it actually mean? How do I understand the nature of a group? What is so special about a group? Everybody says group is not a set and it's different from
Mm.
a set. So I wrote what is called metaphysics of a group. How do
Mm.
I understand philosophically the idea of a group? That was my question, and that was the
Mm.
thing which I was struggling with. And I got a fellowship to go to Simla, so I went,
Mm.
took it, wrote this book.
Nice.
And so, in the sense, what I'm trying to say is, all these research projects, I mean, these books arose as specific questions which I
Questions.
wanted to give an answer to. And my third book was Indian Philosophy and Philosophy of Science.
Mm.
I'm saying this not to list my books, but just
Mm.
to say what type of research questions provoked me. By then, it was 2005. By then, Roddam Narasimha was also there, and he
Mm.
had become very, very interested in Indian mathematics and
Yeah,
so
like,
on.
yeah.
And by then I had learned on my own various things on Indian logic, and I
Mm.
was very
Mm.
interested in the logical tradition and
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
And then I asked this very simple question to me. I said, why is it philosophy of science across the world today, at that time, even today,
Mm. Mm.
is built only from Western philosophical categories?
Mm.
And why did I ask that question? Not because of Indian philosophical categories, because one, it seemed to me that Indian logic had a very direct, intimate connection with the idea of science, much more than Aristotelian formal logic. One.
Formal.
And
Nice.
secondly, it was only the overthrow of Greek philosophy that made possible modern science.
Mm.
So, why, if you want to understand, if philosophy of science task is to understand science, then why are you going back to the same system
Yes.
which you had to overthrow to produce your
Mm.
science?
Mm.
Okay,
Fascinating.
that was the question. So I wrote a
Mm.
book on that, showing, and I wanted to. This is much before all this right wing, left wing, and all that.
Mm.
But I think it was at it was at the point where already the BJP had come in.
Mm.
So um, it would be far more difficult for me to write that now. That
Mm.
time I was still sufficiently insulated
Mm.
from this rhetoric that I could still work on Indian thought
Mm.
without being immediately classified as right wing, left wing, or right wing
Mm.
rather. Immediately at that time, and afterwards, people when they see Indian philosophy, they tend to do that till they see my
Mm.
other writings. But the point is, it gave me a framework for trying to open up how to do
Mm.
philosophy of science across the world. Why can't they draw upon this? I mean, not that it has made any difference, but I'm just
Mm.
saying, at least we know for a lot of people who have picked it up and done work on it at small parts, but across the world, it's very still very difficult to. Just like Indian science will not be taken seriously, they don't want to take any other tradition.
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, so this is the kind of so all of this came as that. But my more popular reading, like What is Science, National Book
Mm.
Trust
What is
Award,
it? Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wrote that as a way in great frustration with science institutes for 20 years,
Mm.
trying to tell them, why are you not teaching these disciplines? What is
Mm.
your problem with these disciplines? Why I was not able to convince them about any of that. So I wrote a popular book thinking
Mm.
that, that at least the other people can read what the history and philosophy of science
Mm.
is, so that they're not bought by the rhetoric of science in India. And as you said, the great trust people have in science, which is
Mm.
very
Mm.
ironic, in a sense, but also
Mm.
understandable because they do think it's a form of liberation for them in some
Relation.
sense.
Yeah.
So, but then there was a major shift when I began my work with Gopal Guru, and we did these two
Mm.
books on caste.
Mm.
Again, the question of asking philosophy, how does one reflect on caste? And what is so surprising to me is when I started this work, there has really been no work, philosophical work on caste and untouchability, two
Mm.
terms which are so central to Indian society.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
what is untouchable? How does one think? So, in a
Mm.
sense, all my work has been just trying to do this conceptual clarification by drawing on tools from so even within philosophy I'm an outlier in the sense
Mm.
I
Mm.
don't subscribe to one philosophy. So normally in philosophy, if you're a continental philosophy, you stick to the analytical philosophy, you
Mm.
stick to that. But for me, I in that sense I think my influence of science is very much there, although when people tell me that I get pissed off, not very happy about it because I think I'm out of it. But I can see there is an influence in the sense I look at the world, I think like a mathematical modeler does, right?
Mm. Ah.
And a mathematical structure is available for modeling any discipline,
Any discipline.
right?
Yes.
It seemingly allows me that freedom to say how I want to use it. So for me, philosophy is in that sense like mathematics. It is a set of ways of thinking about the world. You could call it continental analytical. It doesn't matter.
Mm.
I am willing to read it and learn it. I have no
Mm. No.
party membership to them. So when I do Indian philosophy, I want to read it if it gives me insights into
Makes sense.
the world, right? Or the problems I'm concerned with,
So
whether it's
one
social.
one of the things when you were mentioning this whole process, especially the centrality of questions, that's something which is very fascinating. I've also been talking about this and also writing about this in the blog and other places. Is that the seed of thoughts generally come from questions,
Hmm.
and those questions can evolve into programs like
Hmm.
what you had
Correct.
just mentioned.
Very
Your
true.
own book
Yeah.
book actually evolves into this.
Yeah.
Kind of, could you walk us through that process? Because question is, as you mentioned, it can be a one line question which can lead
Yeah.
to something very profound. In fact, a lot of people who have written
Yeah.
and done some very big work actually start with that kind of a one line
Right.
question
Yeah.
and evolve it as a function of time, and sometimes even as a function of space, because you have to go somewhere and also look at it. Could you please give us a little bit more kind of insight into that? How do the mechanics of, let's say, writing a book, mechanics of taking this question and evolving it into slightly something more broader? Could you please tell us?
Okay. I think although I phrased it it's like a question,
Mm,
but that question is coming from some kind of historical and social conditions, right?
mm,
I'm like, for example, when I wrote Translating the World, my
mm,
first book, I was okay. The question I was asking is how do we read? How do we make meaning making in a text
mm,
of this kind? But I was already immersed in the larger conditions
mm,
of having studied these theories of meaning
mm,
and some part of what was called at the time as postmodernism and so on. But basically, literary theories, narrative theories, and so on, and philosophy of language. And those questions have all been buzzing somewhere.
mm,
But I know that therefore this question takes on a form.
mm,
So it's a question, yeah, that is a trigger, but it
mm,
takes on a form based on these historical and social conditions.
mm,
And they start giving. So when I first started this question, then I begin by writing what is meaning? How do we
mm,
understand meaning in an ordinary text? And then what is special about
mm,
scientific text? So in fact, when I wrote the book, I had to go, as I said, I was in Homi Baba Fellowship. I
Mm,
spent 2 months at MIT and
mm,
Stanford because of the support.
mm,
And I went to the library there and they thought I'm going to write about this. And I discovered in the library, because Niasanal had no books, nothing. I
mm.
discovered there's a whole discipline called translation studies, which I didn't know because
Okay.
I was not a student of literature and
Yeah.
translation studies. And philosophers had written about it, but it was a major discipline called translation studies, which biblical studies people had
Mm,
only
yeah,
written.
yeah. A lot of them do that. Yes, yes.
Yeah. Then I sat in those libraries and studied all those books, and I learned
Mm,
what translation studies is and why that my exposure to a completely new discipline opened
mm.
up the framework for writing this book.
Nice,
It gave
nice.
so I use translation studies as a framework for making this argument that there's a type of translation which happens when we read scientific texts from one
Mm,
semiotic system to the other. What I'm trying to say is that that question arises within a social and historical context, and that then gives me the
yes,
framework
yeah.
to build upon it. Unlike science, because we are not a professional community in India, there are
Mm,
very few, no philosophy department, no, like I said, no funding agency and so on. It's so difficult to set up a program. Like in
mm,
the Ministry of Science, we've been trying so long.
yeah.
I've tried it with other people in Jadavpur and Delhi
Mm,
and so on. We still don't have a separate program for philosophy of science in the country. There
true,
is no
true.
institute of science studies. Even small countries in the world have institute of science studies.
Science studies. Yes, you're right. You're right.
As I said, MIT, Harvard will have one of them. Along with good physics department, they'll also have this. In India, we cannot do it.
Mm,
And I tend to blame scientists for it, because they have been resisting any kind of thing like this. And I can share this with you because there was an idea. You probably know Subhaya Arnachalam, the scientific
mm,
person
yeah.
with open access. This is great insight into science in India, probably the
Mm,
best expert in it. He had many decades ago, he had suggested, no, but 2 3 decades ago, he had suggested this idea of science observatory, a way
mm.
to map Indian science and
Science.
science institutions and so on.
Mm,
And nothing came out of it, obviously. But when I was at NIAS, when Baldev Raj, after I came back from Manipal, and Baldev
mm,
Raj was the director, he was a member of the
mm.
Vision 2020 Vision
Yeah.
Science
Mm,
Vision whatever committee
mm,
for the Niti Ayog, and he had
mm,
asked me to be a part of it because he wanted this social science kind of thing in
mm,
that, and I was part of the member of that committee first few meetings. And it was really, then they said, what is the kind of desire different communities have within science? So everybody gave, some people wanted tanks and missiles, and some people wanted more money to
mm.
do whatever the research. And I had said that there was this proposal by Subhaya Arnachalam, which
Mm,
Niti Ayog should consider and set up a science observatory. And there is a lot of documentation on it. We are willing to give everything. So the
mm,
committee, everybody were quite interested in it and all that. And then nothing came out of it. Then I asked Professor Baldev Raj what happened. He said, no, the DST people are not scuttled it. They said, no, this is something which we don't want to do.
mm.
So what I'm saying is, it's not possible to set up a program in India or to build something around it in any of these disciplines, either in history, sociology, or philosophy of science, or science studies in general. But I think students pick it up. There are a lot
Mm,
more
mm,
people who pick up various parts of our work and do it. People in other disciplines pick it up.
mm.
So, I think that's all we can hope for in these. These are all very marginal fields.
Yeah.
Um,
So do you still means write every day, like in terms of when
no,
you're
I think
working or?
when I'm doing a book, yeah, I think I try and do that. But
Mm,
now, as I said, I'm now finishing up some stuff and stuff. But like now, I do a lot more op-eds. I've been doing for quite some time,
yeah, yeah.
because that's one way to make people think through some of the social questions.
Mm,
So that time there's a kind of a writing.
mm.
And now when I did my novel, of course, it's far more disciplined writing. But my last 4 books have been more reaching towards a larger public reader,
Larger. Yeah.
because I feel like writing only for a specialized group is a bit of a
Mm,
problem. I mean, it's important and that's done. And I've quit my job. I don't have a job, so it doesn't matter. I don't have that kind of a thing. But also, I feel that our real stakeholders are out there, and if I'm a little bit worried about what's happening to the country, then I have to find ways to engage with
yes.
them. You know, engage with them who don't think like us, right? And so when I did the democracy book for Siegel,
Mm.
it was about supposed to be more reader friendly. But we can't escape our philosophy background or whatever. So there will be more of some kind of
Wow.
conceptual thinking. But and then this children thing was a very liberatory thing. So when I
Mm.
realized that, I suddenly got frustrated with teaching adults, and I said, maybe children will be the next hope. And then we started this philosophy of children, and then I wrote the book. Now it's in different languages.
Yeah, I should
I,
mention that. I should mention
yeah,
to the listeners that that book has been translated into Kannada, Telugu, Tamil, Malayalam, and Hindi, if I'm correct.
Hindi. Now the Marathi has just been done,
Wonderful.
but
Oh, yeah,
translation.
Pune people, Marathi is also coming. So,
Yeah,
no, I really felt. In fact, of course, I also asked my daughter to read, and she's been also reading
yeah. I'm
slowly.
looking forward to that.
I have read it, and I've read it more than once
Okay.
because it is very important, Sundar. In fact, that is
Yeah,
something which is surely lacking in science education of
yeah,
looking at philosophical aspect. For example, you asked the question what it is to look at a tree. No, that is one of the beautiful
yeah,
discussions in that
yeah.
book. They are very important. Unfortunately, a lot of people miss it out because I
Mm.
think there's too much of superficial kind of
Absolutely.
glimpsing. Yeah, a lot of these are the things which people probably should engage more.
I think so too, and that's been very good experience. And I do these
Mm.
workshops in now, particularly in some of the rural areas, which I feel
Mm.
far more impactful. It's worth doing. And yeah, then when I did the novel, it is an extension of it because I wanted to do philosophy and thinking about it
Mm.
from the
Mm.
context of finding ways, making ways for people to read it.
Read it. Yeah.
So definitely, if I had written a book on philosophy of language and religion, which is what the
Mm.
novel is
Mm.
about, I mean,
Mm.
language and religion, it would have been very difficult. But it is actually not that easy to write for the novel for me because it's emotionally very difficult because it's a girl, very young girl
Mm.
who stops
Mm.
speaking, and because she doesn't believe in God and she thinks all language is a lie. But I
Mm.
had to write it in a way which is not going to cause people
Course.
get them very angry, or also but also to make people feel, which is what literature's job is,
Yeah.
but also to make them learn something new which they didn't know about language, the nature of
Mm.
language.
Fabulous.
So
Fabulous.
I think that's really, I'm more and more left to me, and if I'm not going to be
Mm.
finishing up some of my other writings, I would really go a lot more into that more
That
because I do think I can reach out more to
mm,
people and
people.
maybe make sense of our world,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, through this through
So
this
making
way.
sense of the world. Coming to that particular point, you have founded Barefoot Philosophers.
Yeah,
Tell us about that. That is a very fascinating concept, and it's also something which is probably badly needed because
yeah,
you know it better that sometimes philosophy is considered as something very high ended in terms of thought
yeah.
process because as you mentioned there are some books which are so incomprehensible.
Yeah,
But as all of us know, even if you don't like philosophy, that is also a kind of a philosophy. Right, there is some philosophical process in that too.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And every time everybody is asking this question, like I do in the novel, somebody says, if I'm saying a prayer, and this only a child can
Mm,
ask, right?
mm,
I'm saying, why grandmother is going on muttering prayers.
mm,
And she asks, where do your prayers go? Who's listening to it?
mm,
You need
mm.
that kind of a mind to ask that.
Ask.
But the problem is to keep track of it for 300 pages. Okay, that's a
Mm.
different story. But the point is that that kind of question is there even in children. And
Children.
much of my philosophical thing, which I find, is actually when I do with these children workshop. It's
Mm,
so, I love it so much. It's
mm.
such a learning experience for me. It's such a
Experience.
joy watching them think through that.
Mm,
Make them question something within themselves. And so I did this barefoot philosophers because I well, I came back to NIAS, and then it really, sometimes working in institutions is really not worth the time and effort for me. And I felt like, look, I want to be free of these constraints.
mm,
And so I started this thing called Barefoot Philosophers because it's really barefoot. It's not registered, so I can't get funds. and nobody gives us funds anyway. So there were a couple of my PhD students, and they had not yet finished their PhD, and we
Yeah.
started it to start off this workshop of children. I've been
Mm.
like the workshop you had attended. I've been doing workshop every year in all
Yes.
places. That's been my joy of teaching. But this one we said little more focused on bringing books out and this and that. And but then they all got jobs and they all went away.
Mm.
So it's still very informal. I do it under the name with various groups. But yeah, it's still barefoot in the sense we're not registered and we don't get funds in some sense. But I see it as I'm using it as an image to keep reminding people
Mm.
of the word
Mm.
philosophy.
Mm.
Many times when I write my op-eds, I use and drop the word philosophy. Or when I do the philosophy for children,
Mm.
I want them to go back having learned a new word called philosophy. It doesn't matter
Mm.
what it is. Somewhere
Mm.
you will encounter it. But in a society in which that word is not even used in our schools
New.
at all, at
Absolutely.
least I'm just bringing it into a larger public consciousness that there is something called philosophy which is very vibrant, very complex.
Mm.
Indian philosophy, Western, Chinese, etc. But it is there as a way of people struggling to make sense of the world in that sense.
One.
And it gives me a framework to go and do something in that name. We've been thinking constantly how to do, should we do more, etc. But right now it's still, you know,
Mm.
in this
In a,
informal sense I keep doing.
in an essence, that making of the world in which you live is is actually probably the most important function of a human being, right? Of course,
Yeah,
happiness, so-called happiness, so-called success, etc.,
sure. Yeah,
are very kind of subjective constructs. They may
yeah,
not be able to understand it, but to reconcile the fact that you are embedded in a society and your thoughts are coming in and going out,
yeah,
needs a philosophical way of looking at it.
sure. Right.
And many a times, even for example, this is common thing, you would have also observed this, a lot of discussion which happens in the media, including, let's say, newspapers and even other online sites, is that economics takes the most prominent and most important kind of phase of the interaction with the society. Obviously understandable, because it has to do with the day-to-day way of functioning.
Yeah,
But if you go a step back and ask the question, what is driving all these things, is actually a philosophy, right? Uh,
yeah.
do you think?
But the struggle is the problem is that people keep fighting about what is philosophy, and that's the problem.
Mm, mm,
Like what is it to be? So what philosophers have done is they've also built walls around themselves,
yeah,
and they,
yeah,
rather than being inclusive, they're being exclusive. And they keep saying,
exactly.
oh, like for example, philosophy for children is not philosophy because I
Mm.
don't quote Plato and Aristotle and stuff. They might say, but I'm saying it doesn't matter
Mm.
to us. But the point is, when these disciplines start, building walls and saying this is
Insulation.
not it. And
Mm,
philosophy has always had this problem because
mm.
Western philosophers don't think Asians and Africans have philosophy. They don't consider Indian philosophy as philosophy.
Wow.
And there's a big, they won't. So if you do a philosophy program, they won't teach Indian philosophy as part of philosophy curriculum.
Very.
All these kinds of problems are there. So
Yeah,
they are
yeah.
very confused things. So rather than going back to the roots as philosophy
Mm,
as this kind of exploration,
mm,
kind of like the Greeks, they used to call them peripatetic philosophers,
mm,
wanderers. This
mm,
kind of
mm,
reflective thing, which is
mm.
present so much in Indian traditions, not
Absolutely.
just classical philosophies, but with all the rebellious philosophies, with subaltern classes,
Mm.
so everywhere. It's such a really amazing sense of
Amazing.
thinking about the world, other human beings, about being social, and
Fascinating.
yeah, that is yeah. We the country has to do more about it. It can't do it. So
Yeah.
they may not want people to ask these critical questions also. No? So
Mm, mm.
it is a
True,
problem.
true. So we'll go to now towards the concluding fun part.
Okay.
Some of the,
What is the time? Okay, I need to leave in 10 minutes. Yeah, but
yeah, yeah, yeah. We'll be done. We'll be done with
because
that.
my mother-in-law is there, my wife has gone and I had to cook for her.
Okay, sure,
She
sure.
had to go cook something quickly.
Yeah. So quickly, Sundar, please a few words in your mother tongue, mother or different languages
Mother
about
tongue.
your motivation of doing philosophy and any message you want to give. Because I want to also bring in a different kind of language to the Pratidwani,
Hmm.
because a lot of people generally also hear to this particular thing in that particular language. So
Yeah.
your few words on that.
Um, ಇವಾಗ ತುಂಬಾ ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಹೆಗ್ಗೋಡು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ವರ್ಕ್ಶಾಪ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವಿ ಮಕ್ಕಳಿಗೆ.
Yeah.
2 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಒಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಇತ್ತು. ಏನಂದ್ರೆ ನಾವು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲಿರುವಾಗ, ನಾವು ಲೆಕ್ಚರ್ ವಿನ್ಯಾಸಲ್ಲಿರುವಾಗ ಅವರು
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಹೊರಗಡೆ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲೇ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷ್ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಹಿಂದಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ.
ಹೌದು.
ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟ್ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಬರೀ ತಮಿಳ್ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಲ್ವಾ?
ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲಿ.
ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲೇ. ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾರ್ಕೆಟ್ ಹೋದ್ರೆ ಬರೀ ತಮಿಳೇ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಮನೆಗೆ ಕೆಲ್ಸಕ್ಕೆ ಬರ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ತಮಿಳಲ್ಲೇ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಜನರಲಿ ಇವಾಗ ನಾರ್ತ್
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಅಂತ ಕೆಲವರು ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಬರ್ತಾ
ಸೊ
ಇದ್ದಾರೆ.
ಮೊದಲು ಫಿಲಾಸಫಿ ಆ ಹೆಗ್ಗೋಡು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಶಿಬಿರ ನಡೀತಾ ಇತ್ತು. ಆ
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಶಿಬಿರದಲ್ಲಿ ಆ, ಆ, ತುಂಬಾ 20 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಹೋಗ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಸೊ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗುವಾಗ ಮೊದಲು ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ವಿ. ನಾವು ಮತ್ತೆ ಶಿವ್ ವಿಶ್ವನಾಥನ್, ಆಶೀಶ್
ಹ್ಮ್.
ನಂದಿಲ್ಲ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ರು. ನಾವೆಲ್ಲ
ಹೌದು.
ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ವಿ. ದೆನ್ ಐ ರಿಯಲೈಸ್ ಅದು ಯಾಕಪ್ಪ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕು, ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡೋಣ ಅಂತ.
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಇಸ್ ಅ ವೆರಿ ಫೂಲಿಶ್ ಮೂವ್. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿರೋರು ಅನಂತ್ ಮೂರ್ತಿ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ, ಆಲ್ ರೈಟರ್ಸ್ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲರೂ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ. ಆಲ್
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಕನ್ನಡ ಸ್ಕಾಲರ್, ಅವ್ರು ಕನ್ನಡ
ಹೌದು.
ಮೇಷ್ಟ್ರು ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಅಷ್ಟು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಮೇಷ್ಟ್ರು. ಎಲ್ಲರೂ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ನಾನು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋಗ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡೋಣ ಅಂತ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿದೆ.
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಆದ್ರೆ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಫಿಲಾಸಫಿ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಫಿಲಾಸಫಿ ಇದು ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ವರ್ಡ್ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಲ್ವಾ?
ಹೌದು. ಹೌದು.
ಅದನ್ನ ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ದರ್ಶನ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ಬೇಕಾ, ಅಥವಾ
ಹ್ಮ್.
ತತ್ವಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ,
ಹ್ಮ್.
ತತ್ವಚಿಂತನೆ,
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಯಾವ್ದನ್ನ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ಆ ಸಂದರ್ಭದಲ್ಲಿ ಕರೆಕ್ಟ್ ಆಗಿ ಬರ್ಬೇಕಲ್ವಾ? ಎಲ್ರು ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ನಾನು ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಮಾತಾಡಕ್ ಶುರು ಮಾಡ್ಬಿಟ್ರೆ ಅದೊಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಇತ್ತು.
ಹೌದು.
ಮೊದಲು ಫಸ್ಟ್ 2 ಇಯರ್ಸ್ ಅದು ಫಿಲಾಸಫಿ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರುವಾಗ,
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಆರ್ಡಿನರಿ ಕಾನ್ವರ್ಸೇಷನ್ ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರುವಾಗ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರ್ತೀವಿ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಈ ತರದ್ದು ಒಂದು, ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಟೆಕ್ನಿಕಲ್ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರಲ್ವಾ.
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಸೊ ನಾನು ಕೆಲವರು ಶರದ್ ಮತ್ತೆ ಇನ್ನೊಬ್ರು
ಹೌದು.
ಶ್ರೀಕಾಂತ್ ಶಾಸ್ತ್ರಿ ಅವರೆಲ್ಲ ಜೊತೆ ಹೋಗಿದ್ವಿ ಅವ್ರು ಕೂಡ.
ಹೌದು.
ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಅವರು ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಮಾತಾಡುವಾಗ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ರೆ ಅದು ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಒಂದು ಯುನೋ, ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ಅವ್ರು ಯಾವಾಗಲೂ ಸೈನ್ಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರಲ್ವಾ.
ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ.
ಸಡನ್
ಹೌದು.
ಆಗಿ ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಇಟ್ಸ್ ನಾಟ್ ಎ ಈಸಿ ಥಿಂಗ್ ಆ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸಿಷನ್ ಮಾಡೋದು.
ಹೌದು.
ಸೊ ಆ ಥರದ್ದು ಒಂದು ಆಯ್ತು, ಐ ಥಿಂಕ್. ಆದ್ರೆ ಆಮೇಲೆ ಈ ಮಕ್ಕಳ ಜೊತೆ ಈ ವರ್ಕ್ಶಾಪ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇರೋದು, ಅದು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲೇ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ವಿ.
ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ರು.
ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ಇಟ್ ವೆರಿ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್. ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಆ ಊರಲ್ಲಿರುವವರು, ಮತ್ತೆ ಈ ಸತಿ ದಾವಣಗೆರೆಯಿಂದ ಕೆಲವರು ಗೌರ್ಮೆಂಟ್ ಸ್ಕೂಲ್ ಬಂದಿದ್ರು. ಅವ್ರು ಎಷ್ಟು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಗೊತ್ತಾ, ಎಷ್ಟು ಚೆನ್ನಾಗಿ ಬರೀತಾರೆ.
ಹೌದು.
ಅವ್ರು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲೇ ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಡಿಸ್ಕಷನ್ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ಅದರಲ್ಲೇ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ ನಾವು.
ಮಾತಾಡಿದ್ರು. ಹ್ಮ್.
ನನಗೆ ತುಂಬಾ ಒಂದು ಗ್ರೇಟ್ ಲರ್ನಿಂಗ್ ಎಕ್ಸ್ಪೀರಿಯನ್ಸ್.
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಸೊ ಇವಾಗ ಫಿಲಾಸಫಿ ಮಾಡೋದಂದ್ರೆ ನಾನು ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂತ ಇದ್ದೀನಲ್ವಾ, ಅದು ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ ಫಸ್ಟ್ ನನಗೆ ಬಿಡ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿತ್ತು ಅಂಗ್ರೇಜಿ. ಫಸ್ಟ್ ಅದನ್ನ
ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್.
ಎಲ್ಲೋ ಬಿಡ್ಬಿಟ್ಟು ಆಮೇಲೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕು. ಅದು ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಕಷ್ಟ. ಆದ್ರೆ ಇವಾಗ ಏನಾಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ರೂರಲ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸಸ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ಇವಾಗ ಇದು ಹಳ್ಳಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕೂಡ ತುಂಬಾ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಬಂದ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದೆ.
ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಬರುತ್ತೆ.
ಈ
ಹೌದು.
ಸತಿ ನಾನು ಈ ಎಗೋಡಲ್ಲಿ ಹೋದ್ವಾರ ಇದು
ಹ್ಮ್.
ವರ್ಕ್ಶಾಪ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕೆಲವು ಸ್ಟೂಡೆಂಟ್ಸ್ ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಬರೆದ್ರು. ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರು,
ಓ,
ಇಲ್ಲ ನಾವು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಆದ್ರೆ ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಸ್
ಬರೆಯೋದಕ್ಕೆ.
ಇಲ್ಲ ಬರೆಯೋಕ್ಕೆ.
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಸೊ ಅದು ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಬಟ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ಇಸ್ ಅ ವೆರಿ ಇಂಪಾರ್ಟೆಂಟ್ ಥಿಂಗ್. ಅದು
ಹೌದು.
ನನಗೆ ಫಿಲಾಸಫಿ ಆಫ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ನಾನು ಈ ನಾವೆಲ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದು ಕೂಡ ಐ ಕಾಲ್ ಇಟ್ ಕನ್ನಡ ರೈಟಿಂಗ್. ಇಟ್ಸ್
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಆಕ್ಚುಲಿ ಕನ್ನಡ ರಿಟರ್ನ್ ಇನ್
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಇಂಗ್ಲಿಷ್ ಸ್ಕ್ರಿಪ್ಟ್. ಆದ್ರೆ
ಹ್ಮ್.
ಈ ಸಮ್ ಕನ್ನಡ ರೈಟರ್ಸ್ ವಿಲ್ ಗೆಟ್ ಅಪ್ಸೆಟ್. ಬಟ್
ಹ್ಮ್.
ನನಗೆ ಐ ಥಿಂಕ್ ಲ್ಯಾಂಗ್ವೇಜ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಇದೆ ಅಲ್ವಾ, ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಭಾಷೆ ಅಂದ್ರೆ ಏನು, ಆ ಭಾಷೆ ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡುವಾಗ ಏನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ,
ಹ್ಮ್. ಹ್ಮ್.
ಅದ್ರಲ್ಲಿ ಏನ್ ವ್ಯತ್ಯಾಸ ಇರುತ್ತೆ, ಯಾವ ತರದ ಒಂದು ಪರಿಕಲ್ಪನೆ ಬೇರೆ ಇರುತ್ತಾ, ಆಲ್ ದಸ್ ಕ್ವಶನ್ಸ್ ದಟ್ ಈಸ್ ವೆರಿ ಫ್ಯಾಸಿನೇಟಿಂಗ್ ಫಾರ್ ಮಿ. ಸೊ
Fabulous.
yeah,
Fabulous.
similarly I do one in Tamil for Tamil students.
Tamil
There
students.
also we do Tamil philosophy workshop of Tamil. So it's a, I think, very different learning in that sense.
Absolutely right. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think
Yeah.
somewhere we have to recover this question of language in different
Language.
ways.
It's very important. It's very, very critical.
And that's another place where philosophy has a great
Has
role
it?
to play.
Mm. Mm. So, any recommendations? Any specific kind of forms of reading, art, or music, anything which you want to recommend to our listeners and to me? I, It need not be only philosophy, but whatever motivates you or whatever you find very interesting.
I the problem is I read a lot of pulp. I watch a lot
Wow,
of pulp.
nice.
So everything which is non-serious. But of course, music-wise, I look at a lot of Hindustani music and stuff.
Hmm.
So music, I have a little bit of weakness for more classical. But in literature and films and stuff, I mean, I do watch some of these other films, but it's really, I think the pulp imagination is a very interesting imagination.
Hmm. Hmm.
How do you not become so bad? So for a time, I used to do film reviews
Hmm.
regularly for Hindu, then Outlook and stuff, because I was interested. How does one think about the idea of the popular?
Yeah, you're right.
What does
You're
it
right.
actually mean? So, but specific recommendations I can't think of right now. But
Okay, okay,
yeah,
that's nice. But what do you do generally to relax? You have any specific
I
thing? I
read
know.
these. I read Lee Child,
Hmm.
uh, things, spy detective novels.
Ah,
I
nice,
really
nice,
love them. That's my favorite genre to go to. Um, then of course
fabulous.
now with all this Netflix and stuff, we get caught in all that.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
my ideal um, leisure is playing.
playing.
If I can get some bakras to play with me, that's when I'm most happiest.
What do you play? What do you play?
I play basketball, cricket.
Hmm.
If nothing else, if some cousins' kids come, I play chess with them.
Nice, nice.
Playing is a very crucial thing for my
Yeah,
playing and
uh,
food.
food. Renewal, renewal.
Those are what drive my philosophy, I think. More than anything
Fantastic.
else. You know?
Sundar, this has been a fabulous,
No, I
fabulous.
should thank. It's been such
You
a
know,
lovely time talking to you. And I think I've
eh,
just gone on. I should have just shut up. But you're
no,
too polite to ask me to keep quiet. But
no, no, no. That is the whole point about actually doing
yeah,
Pratibhani, because
love
it is
so
to have.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
No, no, thank you. And I hope I'll see you when you come to Bangalore.
Yes, yes. I'm
We'll
definitely
definitely
going to
be in
actually meet
touch.
you
Yeah.
on my next visit.
Okay,
So
great.
this is
Great.
Pratidhani, where we try to humanize science. This time with the one and the only Sundar Sarukkai.
Much needed.